Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. I said I didn't open the drawer. The word slipped easily, the kind of lie one tells to smooth over a wrinkle. Yet my palm still remembered the cool, worn wood, the faint tremor as it stuck momentarily before giving way. Dust motes swirled lazily in the air, catching in the pale morning light, settling in my throat. A dry smell lingered like old papers left too long in the dark. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan pressed down gently, each rotation a reminder of time moving, unstopping. On the table, a faint smudge, possibly a fingerprint, glistened briefly before disappearing. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, but a slight twitch in my thumb kept my attention. The drawer was shut now, silent and accusing. My gaze avoided it, focusing instead on the uneven knots in the floorboards. They seemed to pulse with something alive, something waiting. My shoes still felt the imprint of the invisible boundary crossed, a line that could never truly be closed again. My lips tasted of salt, an afterthought of secrets overheard, but I knew the weight of the key in my pocket. The key was brass, tarnished at the edges where fingers had worn it smooth. It had belonged to someone else first, someone who trusted me enough to press it into my palm with instructions whispered like prayers. The metal held warmth longer than it should have, as if it remembered every door it had opened, every secret it had unlocked. When I rolled it between my fingers, it made the softest clicking sound against my wedding ring, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat when I was nervous. The teeth were sharp, precise, designed for a specific purpose that I was only beginning to understand. Sometimes I caught myself reaching for it unconsciously, the way one might worry a rosary or a lucky coin, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. The coffee cup sat abandoned on the windowsill, a brown ring staining the white porcelain where liquid had evaporated. Steam no longer rose from its surface, but the ceramic still held traces of warmth when I pressed my fingertips to its sides. The handle was chipped, a small imperfection that caught the light and threw tiny shadows across the table. Inside, dregs of coffee had settled into patterns that looked almost like writing, like someone had tried to leave a message in the sediment. The bitter scent mixed with something sweeter, vanilla perhaps, or the ghost of pastry eaten nearby. I wondered how long it had been sitting there, whether it belonged to me or to the person who had given me the key. The photograph tucked behind the lamp showed a garden in full bloom, though the colors had faded to sepia tones that made everything look older than it probably was. Two figures stood among the flowers, their faces turned away from the camera as if they had been caught in conversation. One wore a dress with small buttons running down the back, the kind that would require assistance to fasten. The other's hand rested on a fence post, fingers splayed in a gesture that seemed both casual and protective. Something about their posture suggested intimacy, the comfortable closeness of people who knew each other's secrets. I had found this photograph in the drawer, though I couldn't remember seeing it there before. The floorboards creaked in a specific pattern when walked upon, a musical sequence that I had memorized without meaning to. The third board from the wall sang highest, a sharp note that made me wince. The seventh board barely whispered, as if it had been worn down by countless footsteps into submission. Between them the others formed a melody of settling wood and hidden nails, a song that played differently depending on whether one walked quickly or slowly, purposefully or with hesitation. I had learned to avoid the loudest boards, to step carefully around the places that might betray my presence. The house seemed to appreciate this consideration, rewarding my caution with safe passage. The curtains were drawn when I arrived, heavy fabric that blocked out most of the natural light and cast everything in amber shadows. They smelled of dust and something floral, lavender perhaps, or the memory of perfume that had long since faded. When I pushed them aside to look out, they released tiny particles that danced in the sudden brightness, making me sneeze. The view beyond showed an empty street, mailboxes standing at attention like sentinels, a fire hydrant painted yellow that seemed to glow against the gray pavement. But it was the reflection in the glass that caught my attention, a face that looked like mine but somehow different, as if the window had aged me or shown me something I wasn't ready to see. The telephone sat silent on its cradle, black plastic worn smooth by handling. The receiver showed fingerprint smudges where countless conversations had been held, secrets shared, lies told. When I lifted it to check for a dial tone, it felt heavier than expected, weighted with the gravity of words that had passed through its circuits. The cord was twisted in places, evidence of nervous pacing, of difficult conversations that required movement to endure. A small notepad beside it held impressions of writing, indentations pressed deep enough to read even though the original words had been torn away. Numbers mostly, but also what looked like a name or part of one, the letters forming shapes that seemed familiar but remained just beyond recognition. The mirror above the mantel reflected the room at an angle that made everything appear slightly distorted, as if I were seeing the space through water or thick glass. My own image wavered at the edges, features blurring into something that might have been someone else entirely. The silver backing had developed dark spots over the years, creating shadows that moved independently of their sources. When I shifted position, trying to find a clearer view, the reflection seemed to lag behind, creating the unsettling impression that I was watching myself from a moment in the past. The frame was ornate, carved wood painted gold that had chipped to reveal darker wood beneath, like a beautiful face showing its age. The appointment book lay open to a page filled with careful handwriting, entries marked in different colored inks as if multiple people had made notations. Most of the writing was too small to read from where I stood, but certain words jumped out: appointment, discussion, resolution. Times were marked in precise military notation, suggesting someone with a background in organization or discipline. Several entries had been crossed out, thick black lines that obscured whatever had been written beneath. One entry, circled in red ink, simply said "Final Meeting," followed by an address I didn't recognize. The page corners were dog-eared, as if this particular section had been referenced frequently. The scent of cologne lingered in the air, something expensive and subtle that spoke of careful grooming and attention to detail. It wasn't overpowering, just present enough to suggest that someone had been in the room recently, someone who took pride in their appearance. The fragrance mixed with other smells, coffee, as I had noticed before, but also something medicinal, antiseptic, like a hospital or doctor's office. Underneath it all was the mustiness of a house that had been closed up too long, air that had circulated and recirculated until it became stale with its own secrets. I found myself breathing shallowly, as if taking in too much of this atmosphere might somehow contaminate me. The bookshelf held volumes that seemed chosen for display rather than reading, their spines too perfectly aligned, their dust jackets too pristine. But when I pulled one down, it fell open to a page that had been marked with a thin strip of paper. The passage was highlighted in yellow. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Someone had written notes in the margins, observations about human nature and the complexity of motivation that suggested deep thought and careful study. Other books showed similar signs of attention, marked passages that formed a kind of philosophy about deception and self-knowledge. I began to wonder if this collection was meant to be read as a whole, a curriculum in understanding the darker aspects of human behavior. The ashtray on the side table held the remains of cigarettes that had been smoked down to the filter, evidence of nervous habits or long conversations. The butts were stained with different shades of lipstick, suggesting multiple visitors or perhaps one person who changed their appearance frequently. Ash had been scattered by some disturbance, creating gray smudges across the table's polished surface. The smell of old tobacco mixed with something sweeter, perhaps the lingering scent of perfume or scented candles. One cigarette appeared to have been extinguished hastily, crushed rather than allowed to burn down naturally, as if the smoker had been interrupted or had suddenly decided to leave. The desk drawer that I claimed not to have opened contained items that painted a picture of someone living a carefully compartmentalized life. Business cards from different professions, suggesting multiple identities or perhaps just a wide network of acquaintances. A small address book with entries in different handwritings, as if it had been passed among several people or updated by different hands over time. Receipts for purchases that seemed oddly specific, a particular brand of sleeping pills, flowers delivered to an address across town, a rental car taken for just one day. Each item seemed innocent enough on its own, but together they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The window latch was loose, rattling slightly when the wind picked up outside. Someone had tried to fix it, evidenced by fresh scratches around the screws and a small pile of metal shavings on the sill. But the repair had been incomplete, leaving the window slightly ajar in a way that would be noticeable only to someone paying close attention. Through the gap came sounds from outside, children playing in a distant yard, a dog barking, the hum of traffic. But also something else, a rhythmic tapping that might have been tree branches against the house, or might have been something more deliberate, more purposeful. I found myself listening for patterns, for meaning in the random sounds of a neighborhood going about its daily business. The calendar hanging beside the window showed several dates marked with small red X's, a countdown to something that had either already happened or was yet to come. The X's were made with the same red ink as the notation in the appointment book, suggesting a connection between the two records. Most of the marked dates fell within the same month, clustering around what might have been a significant event or deadline. One date was circled multiple times, the ink pressed so hard it had torn through the paper. Below it, someone had written a single word in block letters, but the writing was too small and too faded for me to make out clearly. The throw pillow on the couch bore the impression of someone's head, a depression that had not yet sprung back to its original shape. The fabric was slightly damp, as if from perspiration or tears, and carried a scent that was both familiar and strange. When I pressed my hand to the spot, it felt warm, as if someone had been lying there recently and had only just gotten up. The pillow's position suggested someone who had been resting fitfully, perhaps unable to sleep or comfortable only in short intervals. Nearby, a glass of water sat half empty, its surface showing the faint film that develops when liquid has been sitting undisturbed for several hours. The coat closet held garments that seemed to belong to different people, or perhaps different versions of the same person. A business suit hung beside casual clothes, formal beside informal, expensive beside modest. Each outfit suggested a different role, a different presentation to the world. The pockets, when I dared to check them, yielded small treasures, ticket stubs, business cards, a few coins, and scraps of paper with phone numbers written in hasty handwriting. One coat smelled strongly of the cologne I had noticed earlier, while another carried scents of cooking spices and something medicinal. It was as if each garment held memories of where it had been worn and what had happened while its owner was dressed in it. The bathroom medicine cabinet revealed a collection of prescription bottles, their labels carefully removed or obscured with black marker. The medications themselves were unfamiliar to me, small pills in various colors and shapes that suggested different purposes and different levels of need. Some bottles were nearly empty, others appeared untouched, as if their owner had been experimenting with different treatments or perhaps different identities. The dates on the pharmacy labels, where I could make them out, spanned several months and came from different locations, suggesting either frequent travel or a deliberate attempt to avoid creating patterns that might be noticed. The kitchen held evidence of meals prepared but not necessarily eaten. A plate in the sink showed traces of food that had been pushed around rather than consumed, as if the person had lost their appetite partway through the meal. The refrigerator contained items that seemed chosen for their long shelf life rather than their appeal. Canned goods, processed foods, things that could sustain someone who wasn't sure how long they might need to remain in one place. But there were also fresh flowers in a vase on the counter, bright blooms that suggested someone who still cared about beauty, who still hoped for reasons to make their environment pleasant. The bedroom dresser top held personal items arranged with the kind of precision that suggested either military training or obsessive attention to detail. A brush and comb set aligned perfectly parallel, a small jewelry box positioned at exact right angles to the mirror's base, coins stacked in neat piles according to denomination. But the arrangement felt staged, too perfect to be natural, as if someone had been expecting inspection or perhaps preparing for a departure that required leaving everything in order. One drawer was slightly open, revealing the corner of what looked like a passport or other important document, the kind of thing one keeps close when planning to travel or when needing to prove identity at a moment's notice. The basement stairs creaked with a different rhythm than the floorboards above, each step producing its own note in a descending scale that ended in silence. The air below was cooler, carrying scents of concrete and stored belongings, the accumulated odors of a life in transition. Boxes were stacked along the walls, labeled in the same careful handwriting I had seen elsewhere, but the labels were generic: books, papers, miscellaneous. When I lifted the corner of one box's lid, I found items that seemed randomly assorted, as if someone had packed quickly without regard for organization. But underneath the apparent chaos was evidence of careful selection, items chosen for their significance rather than their practical value. The back door key hung on a hook that had been recently installed, evidenced by fresh screw holes and a small pile of wall dust on the floor below. The key itself was newer than the brass one in my pocket, its surface still bright with factory shine, but it had been used, showed the small scratches and wear marks that come from regular handling. Someone had needed quick access to this exit, had wanted the ability to leave without being seen from the front of the house. The door itself showed signs of recent use, the lock mechanism well-oiled and operating smoothly despite the house's general air of neglect. The attic access panel above the hallway was slightly askew, as if someone had replaced it hastily or without proper attention to alignment. A few drops of what might have been water stained the ceiling around the edges, but the stains looked too uniform to be from a lake, more like they had been created by something being lowered or raised through the opening. When I stood on a chair to get a closer look, I could see scratches around the panel's edges, evidence of frequent removal and replacement. The attic space beyond was dark, but I could make out the shapes of stored items, boxes and bags that seemed to mirror the organized chaos I had found in the basement. The living room carpet showed wear patterns that told stories of habitual movement. A path from the front door to the kitchen, another from the couch to the window, tracks that spoke of restless pacing or perhaps surveillance, someone keeping watch over the street outside. But there were also areas where the carpet was pristine, spaces that had been carefully avoided or perhaps furniture that had been moved recently, leaving behind the impressions of table legs and chair feet. One corner showed signs of recent cleaning, a spot where something had been spilled and scrubbed away with enough vigor to lighten the surrounding fibers. The thermostat was set higher than seemed comfortable, creating an atmosphere that felt slightly oppressive, as if someone had been trying to chase away a chill that came from within rather than without. The heating system cycled on and off with mechanical precision, but the sound it made was somehow unsettling, a rhythmic breathing that seemed too much like a living presence. Vents throughout the house carried not just warm air but also sounds, whispers of movement and settling that could have been the normal sounds of an old house or could have been something more deliberate, more purposeful. The front porch light was controlled by a switch inside the door, but the bulb had been removed, leaving the fixture empty and dark. On the porch itself, a newspaper lay folded as if it had been read and carefully replaced, but the date was from several days ago, suggesting either that delivery had stopped or that no one was collecting the papers regularly. The mailbox showed similar signs of neglect, stuffed with envelopes and advertisements that had accumulated over time. But hidden among the obvious mail was correspondence that looked more personal, letters addressed in handwriting rather than printed labels, communications that someone might have been expecting or dreading. The garage held a car that appeared to have been driven recently, its engine still ticking with the sounds of cooling metal. The odometer showed mileage that suggested regular use, but the interior was meticulously clean, wiped down with the kind of attention that goes beyond normal maintenance. Maps were folded in a glove compartment, routes highlighted in the same red ink I had seen elsewhere, destinations marked with the same careful precision that characterized everything else in this place. But some of the highlighted routes led to places that seemed to have no connection to each other, a random pattern that might have been meaningful only to the person who had drawn the lines. The tool shed in the backyard was locked, but the lock was new, installed recently enough that the metal still showed its original shine. Through the small window, I could see shapes that might have been garden tools or might have been something else entirely, objects hung on walls and arranged on shelves with the same obsessive organization I had noticed throughout the house. The ground around the shed showed signs of recent digging, areas where the earth had been disturbed and then carefully smoothed over, as if someone had been burying things or perhaps retrieving items that had been buried before. The final element that drew my attention was a small tape recorder, the old-fashioned kind with actual cassette tapes, sitting on the kitchen counter beside the vase of fresh flowers. The record button was depressed, a small red light indicating that it was actively recording, had perhaps been recording since before I arrived. How long had it been running? What sounds had it captured? My own footsteps, my own breathing, the small sounds I had made while exploring this place that was becoming less familiar and more disturbing with each discovery. The tape was nearly full, its reels showing that hours of recording had already taken place. I reached toward the stop button, then hesitated, my finger hovering over the control as I realized that stopping the recording might be exactly what someone was waiting for me to do. Story 2. Manhole cover didn't echo beneath my step. My shoes brushed the surface, anticipating the familiar hollow clang, but soundlessly they moved forward. Each footfall was absorbed, swallowed by a ground determined to remain mute. No wind touched my face, yet the trees seemed to sway in a silent rhythm as if avoiding my gaze. My eyes searched the storefronts, glancing off the glass that usually mirrored back an outline, a shadow of my presence. Instead, the windows returned nothing, a blank denial of existence. A distant car alarm teetered on the edge of audibility, then vanished. I reached towards the nearest pane, hesitating as fingertips approached, an inch away from confirming what the reflection wouldn't. But even my fingers lingered, suspended in doubt, questioning the welcome of the cold surface. The coffee cup sits on my kitchen table, still warm. Steam rises in lazy spirals that remind me of something I can't quite place. I don't remember making coffee. The mug belongs to someone else, I think. Blue ceramic with a chip on the handle. My mugs are white, all of them. I've always preferred white. She used to say I was too particular about things like that. Colors, symmetry, the way towels should be folded. But she's not here to say anything anymore, and the blue mug sits on my table like an accusation. The phone rang while I was staring at it. 3 rings, then silence, no voicemail. The caller ID showed a number I almost recognized, digits that felt familiar in the wrong way, like a song played in the wrong key. I've been walking the same route for weeks now. The pharmacy, the post office, the small market with the flickering sign. The clerk there watches me differently lately. Her eyes follow my movements as I select items I don't need. Bread, milk, things that expire, things that assume a future. "You're buying for 2 again," she said last week, scanning items across the counter. Her voice carried something between curiosity and concern. I wasn't buying for 2. I never buy for 2 anymore. But when I counted the items in my basket, she was right. 2 of everything. 2 apples, 2 containers of yogurt, 2 newspapers, as if my hands had forgotten what my mind insisted on remembering. The basement door was open when I came home. I always keep it locked. The key hangs on a hook beside the refrigerator, and I check it obsessively. 3 times before bed, twice in the morning. But there it was, hanging in its proper place, while the door below stood ajar like a mouth caught mid-sentence. The stairs descend into darkness that feels thicker than it should. I installed motion sensor lights after she left, but they've been acting strangely, flickering on when I'm nowhere near them, staying dark when I need them most. Something moves down there sometimes, not footsteps exactly, more like the sound fabric makes when it brushes against concrete, soft, persistent, patient. I found the photographs while cleaning out the spare room, hidden behind books I'd never read, books she'd insisted on keeping. The pictures showed places I'd never been, a cabin beside a lake, a dirt road leading nowhere, a woman's hands holding flowers I couldn't identify. The woman's hands looked like mine. But I've never picked wildflowers. I'm allergic to most plants. My hands break out in rashes that take weeks to heal. She knew this. She always knew this. The detective came by again. Same questions, different phrasing. Where was I that weekend? Did I notice anything unusual about her behavior? Had we argued recently? "People don't just disappear," he said, settling into the chair she used to claim. The cushion still holds the impression of her body, a subtle depression that refuses to bounce back. I wanted to tell him about the coffee mug, about the basement door, about the photographs that show my hands doing impossible things. Instead, I offered him tea and watched him study my face like he was reading a language he only half understood. "Sometimes they do," I said. "Sometimes disappearing is the only honest thing left to do." He wrote something in his notebook. The pen scratched against paper with the intensity of someone trying to capture more than words. The market clerk mentioned seeing her last week, standing in the produce section, examining apples with the careful attention she always gave to imperfect things. Bruised fruit, wilted flowers, stray cats with missing ears. She looked good, the clerk said, rested, like she'd been somewhere peaceful. But that's impossible. The detective showed me the timeline, the credit cards unused, the bank account untouched, the cell phone pinging its last signal from our bedroom dresser, where I found it that morning, plugged into the charger she never remembered to use. I've started leaving the basement door unlocked. The sounds have grown more frequent, more distinct. Sometimes I hear what might be footsteps, sometimes humming, a tune I don't recognize but somehow know by heart. The motion lights work perfectly now. They illuminate empty space with mechanical precision, casting shadows that move independently of any visible source. I bought groceries for two again. The clerk didn't comment this time, but I caught her glance toward the parking lot as if expecting to see someone waiting in my car. The passenger seat remains empty, but I've started buckling the seatbelt anyway, a habit that feels both foolish and necessary. The coffee mug appears in different places now. The bathroom counter, the bedroom nightstand, the front porch steps, always warm, always recently used, always smelling faintly of the vanilla creamer she preferred and I despised. I've been thinking about the photographs again, the woman's hands that look like mine but couldn't be mine, the cabin I've never seen but somehow remember, the flowers that would make me sick but feel familiar against my palms. Memory is unreliable, the detective told me. Stress can create false recollections. Guilt can manufacture entire experiences that feel more real than reality. But guilt about what? The basement stairs creak now when I descend them. 17 steps to the bottom, each one announcing my presence to whatever waits below. The concrete floor shows scuff marks I don't remember making. Scratches that could be from furniture being moved or something else entirely. I found a second set of keys in the kitchen drawer. House keys, car keys, keys to places I can't identify. They're worn smooth, handled frequently by someone who knew exactly which doors they opened. The detective asked if she had copies made, if she'd given anyone else access to our home. She was private about things like that, I told him. Secretive maybe, but not careless. He nodded, but his expression suggested he was cataloging my words for future reference, building a case from conversations I didn't realize I was participating in. The phone rings at the same time each evening now. 3 rings, then silence. I've started answering, but the line holds only the sound of breathing that might be mine, echoing back from some impossible distance. "Hello," I say into the quiet. The breathing pauses as if considering a response. Then the line goes dead, and I'm left holding a device that connects me to nothing. I've been sleeping in the guest room. The bed we shared has begun to feel too large and too small simultaneously. Too much space for one person, not enough for the presence I sometimes sense beside me in the dark. The sheets smell like vanilla and something else, something earthy and green, like flowers crushed underfoot. The market clerk asked about her again, whether she'd found what she was looking for, whether she'd mentioned traveling anywhere specific. She didn't say much, I replied. She rarely did toward the end. But that's not entirely true. She talked constantly those final weeks about places she wanted to visit, people she needed to see, things she had to finish before it was too late. I assumed she meant the garden, the half-painted fence, the photo albums she'd been organizing with obsessive attention to chronology. Now I wonder if she meant something else entirely. The basement door closes itself now. I hear it from upstairs, the soft click of the latch engaging with mechanical certainty. When I check, the key hangs in its designated place, untouched but somehow different, warmer than it should be, slightly damp as if recently held by nervous fingers. I've stopped going down there. Whatever moves in the darkness can have its privacy. Some sounds are better left uninvestigated. Some spaces are meant to keep their secrets. The detective called with an update. Sightings in 3 different states. A woman matching her description buying gas, ordering food, checking into motels under names that aren't hers but could be. People see what they expect to see, he explained. Missing person cases generate a lot of false leads. But he sounded uncertain, as if the evidence was pointing in directions that made him uncomfortable. I wanted to ask about the photographs, about the hands that looked like mine doing things I couldn't do, about the places I've never been that feel like home. Instead, I thanked him for calling and hung up before he could ask more questions I couldn't answer honestly. The coffee mug sits on my kitchen table again, still warm, still smelling of vanilla, still impossible. I pick it up this time. The ceramic feels familiar against my palms, worn smooth in exactly the places my fingers naturally rest. The chip on the handle fits perfectly against my thumb, as if shaped by years of careful handling. I don't remember buying this mug. I don't remember her buying it either. But my hands remember holding it. The basement door stands open again, and this time I don't hesitate. 17 steps down into darkness that welcomes me like an old friend. The motion lights illuminate each footfall with perfect timing, as if they've been waiting for this moment. At the bottom, I find what I've been avoiding, what I've been forgetting, what I've been remembering wrong. The garden tools still dirty, the plastic sheeting carefully folded, the lime, half-empty bag sitting beside a space in the concrete that looks newer than the rest. And in the corner, a suitcase I recognize but don't remember packing. My suitcase. The phone rings upstairs, 3 rings, then silence. But this time I think I know who's calling. Story 3. I stood in the dim hallway where the faint outline of my shadow barely touched the opposing wall. The floor beneath me seemed far too quiet for a house so old, holding its breath like a sleeping giant. The wind outside teased the leaves against the window, a sound as soft as a secret. Yet the true disquiet came from within, from the rooms I couldn't see. The air held a charged uncertainty, a sense of a presence waiting to be revealed, a whisper of bare feet over old wood. I shifted my weight, listening for what wasn't there, when the creak of a loose board gave itself away, somewhere just out of sight. The sound pulls me back, always back to that first morning when I found the photograph tucked between pages of a book I'd never opened. A woman's face, half turned toward the camera, her expression caught between surprise and something else. Something I couldn't name then and still struggle to identify now. But I'm getting ahead of myself, or behind myself. Time moves strangely when you're trying to reconstruct what might have happened. The case file sits on my kitchen table now, coffee rings staining the manila folder. I've read it so many times the pages have gone soft at the edges. Missing person report filed on a Tuesday. Or was it Wednesday? The details blur together like watercolors in rain. She disappeared from this house, this hallway where I now stand, feeling the weight of her absence press against my shoulders like a heavy coat. I remember the detective's voice on the phone, flat and bureaucratic, no signs of struggle, no forced entry, personal belongings left behind, including purse and identification. What he didn't say, what the report doesn't capture, is the way the house felt when I first walked through it. Like holding your breath underwater, that pressure building in your chest until you can't tell if you're floating or drowning. The photograph, I keep coming back to it. I found it 3 weeks after moving in, wedged between pages of a cookbook that had been left in the kitchen drawer. The cookbook was ordinary enough, stained with use, margins filled with handwritten notes in careful script, but the photograph felt deliberate, placed there, waiting. The woman in the picture wore a blue dress, the kind with small buttons running up the front. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the curve of her neck. She was standing in what I now recognize as this very hallway, though the lighting was different, warmer, more alive. I showed it to my neighbor, the elderly man who tends his garden with religious devotion. He studied it for a long time, holding it up to catch the light. "That's her," he said finally, "the one who lived here before." Before what I wanted to ask, before she vanished, before I arrived, before the house began holding its breath. But he was already turning away, his attention drawn back to his roses. The police report mentions a boyfriend, former boyfriend. They questioned him twice, released him both times. No evidence, the detective explained when I called to ask. No motive beyond the usual complications of relationships that end badly. I've driven past his apartment building, a squat brick structure with narrow windows and a parking lot full of weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. I've never gone inside, never knocked on his door. What would I say? What would I ask that hasn't already been asked? Sometimes I imagine the conversation anyway. Picture him opening the door, his face shifting from confusion to recognition to something else. Fear, guilt, relief that someone is still asking questions. She was unhappy, he might say, restless, always talking about leaving, starting over somewhere new. But that doesn't explain the photograph. Doesn't explain why she left her identification behind, her credit cards untouched, her car keys hanging on the hook by the front door. The keys are still there. The landlord mentioned it when I signed the lease, said I could use them if I wanted. The car had been towed months ago, impounded and eventually sold. But the keys remain, a small brass anchor holding her to this place. I've held them, felt their weight in my palm, tried to imagine her fingers closing around them for the last time. The metal is warm to the touch, though that might just be the heat from my own skin. There are other things too, small details that don't appear in any report. The way certain floorboards creak in sequence, as if someone is walking a familiar path through the house in the dark. The window in the bedroom that won't stay locked, no matter how many times I turn the latch. The faint scent of perfume that sometimes lingers in the bathroom, sweet and floral and completely unlike anything I wear. I've mentioned these things to friends, to my sister when she calls to check on me. They nod and make understanding sounds, but I can see the concern in their eyes. The way they glance at each other when they think I'm not looking. "Maybe you should consider moving," my sister suggested last time she visited. "Find somewhere with less history." But history is exactly what I'm looking for. The story that isn't in the police report, the truth that lives in the spaces between official statements and documented facts. I've started keeping a journal, writing down everything I notice, every detail that seems significant or strange. The pages are filling up quickly, my handwriting growing smaller and more cramped as I try to capture every nuance, every possibility. Reading back through my entries, I'm struck by how often I contradict myself, how certain details shift and change depending on my mood, the weather, the quality of light filtering through the windows. Was she wearing a blue dress in the photograph, or was it green? Did the neighbor say he saw her leaving with a suitcase, or did I imagine that conversation entirely? Memory is unreliable, I know this, but it's all I have to work with. The detective assigned to her case retired last year. His replacement is younger, more skeptical. When I called to ask about new leads, new evidence, he was polite but dismissive. These cases, they usually resolve themselves one way or another, he told me. People who don't want to be found, generally they stay that way. But what if she didn't choose to disappear? What if something else happened, something that left no obvious traces, no clear evidence of foul play? I've been researching similar cases, spending hours online reading about other women who vanished without explanation. The patterns are both comforting and disturbing. Comforting because I'm not alone in my obsession, disturbing because the answers are so rarely satisfying. Most of the time, there are no answers at all. The house creaks around me now as I stand in the hallway, listening. The sound that drew me back here, that pulled me from my kitchen table and my coffee-stained files, doesn't repeat itself. Maybe it was just the building settling, old wood adjusting to changes in temperature and humidity. Or maybe it was something else. I've been living here for 6 months now, long enough to learn the house's rhythms, its moods and habits. I know which steps on the staircase will announce my presence, which doors swing open on their own when the wind picks up. I know the way shadows move across the walls as the sun tracks from east to west, and how the light changes color in the late afternoon, growing golden and thick. But I still don't know what happened to her. Sometimes I think I'm close to understanding. A detail will click into place, a connection will form between two seemingly unrelated facts. But then the moment passes, the insight dissolves, and I'm left with nothing but questions and the persistent feeling that I'm missing something obvious. The photograph sits on my nightstand now, propped against a lamp where I can see it when I wake up each morning. Her face has become familiar to me, as recognizable as my own reflection. I've studied every detail, the way her eyebrows arch slightly, the small scar on her chin, the way she holds her shoulders as if she's about to move, to step out of the frame and into motion. I've shown the picture to shopkeepers in town, waitresses at the local diner, librarians and postal workers, and anyone else who might have known her. Most shake their heads politely, claim no recognition, but a few pause, their expressions shifting in ways that suggest memory, connection, knowledge they're reluctant to share. The woman who works at the flower shop studied the photograph for a long time before handing it back to me. She used to buy white roses, she said finally. Every few weeks, always the same thing. White roses, no baby's breath, no filler, just the roses. Did she say who they were for? The woman shook her head. She wasn't much for conversation, polite but private, you know the type. I don't actually, I'm the opposite, too eager to share, too willing to trust strangers with personal information. It's a trait that has served me well in my search for answers, but poorly in almost every other aspect of my life. The roses intrigue me. White roses suggest remembrance, mourning, new beginnings, but they could also mean nothing at all, could simply be her favorite flower with no deeper significance. I've started buying white roses myself, bringing them home and arranging them in a vase by the kitchen window. They don't last long, but while they're fresh, they fill the room with a clean, sweet scent that makes the house feel less empty. Is this how she felt, standing in this same kitchen, arranging flowers, going through the motions of a normal life while something darker lurked beneath the surface? The police report mentions that she had been seeing a therapist. Privacy laws prevent me from learning much about those sessions, but the therapist agreed to speak with me briefly, off the record. She was dealing with anxiety, the therapist told me over coffee at a neutral location downtown. Nothing unusual, nothing that would suggest she was in immediate danger. She was working through some relationship issues, some family trauma from her childhood. Standard stuff, really. Did she ever mention feeling threatened, afraid of someone? The therapist hesitated. She was cautious, hypervigilant, you might say, always checking locks, looking over her shoulder. But again, that's not uncommon for someone with her history. What history? I can't be specific, but she had reasons to be careful. The conversation left me with more questions than answers, but it also provided a new framework for understanding her disappearance. Maybe she wasn't taken, maybe she ran. But from what, and why leave everything behind? I've been having dreams about her, not nightmares exactly, but vivid, unsettling dreams where she appears in my house, moving through the rooms as if she still lives here. In the dreams, she's always just out of reach, always turning a corner or disappearing through a doorway before I can speak to her. Sometimes she's wearing the blue dress from the photograph. Sometimes she's in pajamas or a coat or nothing at all. But her expression is always the same, urgent, desperate, as if she's trying to tell me something important but can't find the words. I wake from these dreams with my heart racing, my sheets damp with sweat. The house feels different in those moments, charged with possibility and dread. I'll lie still, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, waiting for some sign that the dreams are more than just my subconscious processing the information I've absorbed during my waking hours. But the house remains quiet, too quiet, as if it's holding secrets close to its chest. I've started talking to her. Out loud when I'm alone in the house, I'll address the empty rooms as if she can hear me. Where did you go? I ask the kitchen while I make my morning coffee. What were you so afraid of? I tell myself this is a normal part of the process, that people who become obsessed with unsolved cases often develop a sense of connection with the victims. But it feels like more than that. It feels like she's listening. The journal I've been keeping has grown thick with observations and theories. I've mapped out timelines, drawn connections between different pieces of information, created elaborate charts that cover my dining room wall. From a distance, it probably looks like the work of someone who has lost perspective, who has let curiosity become compulsion. Maybe that's exactly what it is. But I can't stop. Every new detail, every small revelation feels like progress towards some larger understanding. Even when the details contradict each other, even when the revelations lead nowhere, I continue collecting and cataloging, building a monument to her absence. The boyfriend's name appears frequently in my notes. I've driven past his apartment so many times I've memorized the license plates of the other cars in the lot. I know his work schedule, his habits, the bar where he drinks on weekends. I've never approached him directly, but I've observed him from a distance, trying to read guilt or innocence in his posture, his expressions, the way he interacts with other people. He seems ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of man you'd forget meeting, whose face would blur together with a dozen others in your memory, but maybe that's exactly what makes him dangerous. Or maybe he's completely innocent, and I'm wasting time watching the wrong person. The uncertainty is exhausting. Every lead splits into multiple possibilities. Every answer generates new questions. I feel like I'm trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half might belong to different puzzles entirely. But I can't let go. Something about her story has hooked itself into my chest, and every attempt to move on only drives it deeper. The creak comes again, soft and deliberate. This time I'm ready for it, my attention focused entirely on the sound. It's coming from upstairs, from the direction of the bedroom. Footsteps, or something that wants me to think it's footsteps. I climb the stairs slowly, avoiding the boards I know will announce my approach. The hallway upstairs is darker than the one below, narrow and oppressive. The bedroom door is closed, though I'm certain I left it open this morning. My hand hovers over the doorknob. This is the moment in every horror movie where the audience screams at the protagonist not to open the door, not to investigate the strange sound, not to walk directly into obvious danger. But this isn't a movie. This is my life, my house, my search for truth. And the truth, whatever it is, waits on the other side of this door. I turn the handle and step inside. The room is empty, of course it's empty, but the window is open, the curtains moving in a breeze that carries the scent of rain and distant flowers. I closed that window this morning. I remember closing it, remember turning the latch, remember checking it twice. On the nightstand, the photograph has been moved. Not dramatically, just shifted a few inches to the right so that her face catches the light differently. The change is subtle enough that I might have imagined it, might be misremembering where I placed it originally. But I know what I know. I pick up the photograph, study her face for the 100th time. In this new light, her expression seems different, less surprised, more knowing. As if she's been waiting for me to notice, to pay attention, to finally understand what she's been trying to tell me. The realization comes slowly, like dawn breaking over a landscape I thought I knew. The photograph wasn't hidden in the cookbook by accident. It was placed there deliberately, left for whoever would come next, whoever would care enough to look for answers. She knew she was going to disappear. Knew and prepared for it, left clues for someone like me to find. But if she knew, if she planned it, then why does the house feel so haunted by her absence? Why do the dreams feel so urgent, so desperate? Maybe knowing and wanting are different things. Maybe she knew she had to leave but didn't want to go. Or maybe I'm wrong about everything. Maybe the photograph means nothing. The dreams are just dreams, and the sounds in the house are nothing more than old wood settling in the changing weather. The truth feels both closer and further away than ever. I hold it in my hands like water, and watch it slip through my fingers no matter how tightly I try to grasp it. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering across the roof. The house sighs around me, exhaling secrets I may never fully understand, but I'll keep trying, keep listening, keep searching for the story that lives in the spaces between what I know and what I can prove. Because somewhere in those spaces, she's still waiting, still trying to tell me what happened in her final moments in this house, still hoping someone will care enough to piece together the fragments of her interrupted life. And maybe eventually I'll be smart enough to hear what she's been trying to say all along. The photograph grows warm in my hands, or maybe my hands are growing cold. The distinction no longer seems important. What matters is the weight of her gaze, the promise of answers that dance just beyond my reach, and the persistent feeling that the real mystery isn't where she went. It's why she's still here, story 4. The key card registered an entry at precisely 7:41 p.m. Upon inspection, the furnishings remained undisturbed, positioned as per standard arrangements, and the curtains were drawn evenly across the windows. A single shoe, its mate absent, rested beside the armchair. The television was powered off, yet the remote indicator blinked, suggesting recent activation. Room temperature matched a programmed setting of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The wastebasket was empty, save for a single disposed tissue. However, the safe showed no signs of tampering, though its door was ajar. I keep thinking about that shoe. Black leather, scuffed at the toe, size 8, maybe 8.5. The kind you wear when you need to look professional but comfortable. I've written it down 17 times in my notebook, each description slightly different. Sometimes I remember it pointing toward the window, other times toward the door. The guest called down to the front desk that morning. I took the call myself. Her voice was steady, unremarkable. She asked about checkout procedures, whether housekeeping could wait until afternoon. Standard request. I made a note in the system, flagged the room for late service. But here's what bothers me. I don't remember hanging up first. The carpet showed no unusual impressions. I walked the perimeter twice, looking for anything the initial sweep might have missed. The investigators had already photographed everything, measured distances, collected samples. Still, I found myself returning to that space between the bed and the window where the light fell differently. My supervisor says I'm too invested, that it's natural to feel responsible when something happens on your shift in your hotel. She uses words like closure and moving forward, as if events like these follow a prescribed timeline for resolution. I've been working nights for 3 months now. You see things differently in those hours between midnight and dawn, the way shadows settle, how sounds carry through empty hallways, the particular quality of silence that fills a building when most of its occupants are sleeping. The guest had stayed with us twice before, both times room 412. Both times she requested extra towels and declined daily housekeeping. Her registration information was minimal but complete. Credit card processed without issue. No special requests beyond the usual. I keep the security footage on a loop in my mind. The hallway camera shows her entering at 6:23 p.m., carrying a small overnight bag and what appears to be a manila envelope. She moves with purpose, not hurried but deliberate. The timestamp continues running, but she doesn't emerge again. At least not that we can see. The envelope troubles me most. In my mental replay, it seems thick, substantial. The kind that contains documents rather than correspondence. But when I described it to the investigators, I found myself uncertain. Maybe it was a book, maybe nothing at all. There's a sound I can't place. I hear it sometimes during my rounds, a soft, rhythmic tapping that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. The building is old, full of settling noises and mechanical hums. Steam pipes, ventilation systems, the elevator machinery. Still, this sound feels different, intentional. The other shoe never turned up. I've walked every floor, checked every common area, every closet and storage room. The laundry reported nothing unusual in their collection from that evening. The housekeeping staff, when pressed, remembered nothing remarkable about the room from previous cleanings. Yet someone must have seen something. Hotels are ecosystems of observation. Guests watching other guests, staff monitoring movements, security systems recording everything. Nothing happens in complete isolation. The safe contained personal documents, passport, insurance papers, what appeared to be legal correspondence, all belonging to the registered guest, all apparently in order. The investigators photographed each item, returned them to their manila folder, sealed everything as evidence. But the safe door remained ajar, and I can't stop wondering why. My shift that evening was routine until it wasn't. I processed 3 checkouts, handled a noise complaint on the second floor, assisted with a malfunctioning key card. The usual rhythm of hospitality work. Then the maintenance call came in around 8 p.m., a guest reporting an unusual odor in the hallway. I should have gone up immediately. Instead, I finished updating the registration system, responded to an email from corporate, made fresh coffee for the lobby. Small delays that feel enormous in retrospect. The hallway smelled like cleaning solution when I finally arrived. Sharp, chemical, not unpleasant but noticeable. I knocked on 412, received no response, used my master key to investigate. That's when I found the room as described in the report, undisturbed but wrong somehow, like a stage set between scenes. I've tried to reconstruct her movements. The bed showed signs of recent use, the bathroom towels were damp. She had ordered room service earlier, the tray collected around 5 p.m. according to kitchen records. The meal was barely touched, they noted, soup and salad mostly untouched. The television guide was open to the evening programming. Someone had circled a documentary about missing persons cases. The ink was fresh, still slightly wet when I pressed my finger to the page. My notebook has become a catalog of details that may or may not matter. The angle of the curtains, the temperature reading on the digital thermostat, the fact that the ice bucket was empty but showed water marks at the bottom. I write and rewrite these observations, searching for patterns that probably don't exist. The investigators asked about my background, my training, how long I'd worked in hospitality. Standard questions, they assured me. They were thorough but not suspicious. Still, I found myself over-explaining, offering details they hadn't requested. There's something about being the last person to see someone that changes you, even when you're not sure you actually saw them at all. The guest's car remained in the parking structure for 2 additional days. A sedan, unremarkable, properly parked between the lines. When they finally towed it, I watched from the lobby window. It started immediately, ran smoothly. Nothing to suggest mechanical trouble or urgent abandonment. I dream about that room now. Not nightmares exactly, but persistent visions where I'm searching for something I can't name. In the dreams, the missing shoe is always in a different location. Sometimes it's not missing at all. The hotel has returned to normal operations. Room 412 is bookable again, though it remains mostly vacant. Guests seem to sense something, or perhaps the housekeeping staff unconsciously steers reservations elsewhere. The room rate hasn't changed, but availability has. I've started working double shifts when possible. The overtime helps, but that's not why I stay. There's something unfinished about this place, this situation, like a conversation interrupted mid-sentence. The manila envelope from the security footage bothers me because I remember it differently each time. Sometimes thick, sometimes thin. Sometimes she carries it, sometimes it's tucked under her arm. Memory is unreliable, I know this, but the variations feel significant. My supervisor suggested I speak with someone. Professional counseling, she called it. Employee assistance programs, resources for processing traumatic workplace events. I made the appointment but haven't attended. What would I say? That I'm haunted by details that might not be accurate about events I may not have witnessed. The sound in the walls has stopped. I noticed its absence before I remembered its presence. Now the building feels too quiet, like something essential has been removed. I've been thinking about the tissue in the wastebasket, a single tissue, crumpled but not used, as if someone had pulled it from the box, considered it, then discarded it without purpose. Such a small thing to document, but the investigators photographed it from multiple angles. The guest checkout system shows her as departed, though she never formally checked out. An administrative correction necessary for billing purposes. Her credit card was charged for the full stay, no disputes filed. Paperwork completed, case closed from a business perspective. But the missing shoe remains missing. I walk past room 412 during my rounds, always pausing at the door. The electronic lock blinks green when I wave my master key near the sensor, ready to grant access I no longer need. Sometimes I think I hear movement inside, but the room is always empty when I check. The documentary she had circled in the television guide was about people who disappeared deliberately. New identities, staged departures, the psychology of voluntary vanishing. I watched it later, searching for connections that probably don't exist. There's a theory about hotel rooms that they retain impressions of their occupants, not supernatural, just the accumulated weight of human presence. Scents, sounds, the subtle rearrangement of space. Room 412 feels lighter somehow, as if something essential has been extracted. The investigators concluded their work efficiently. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. Personal effects secured, statements taken, reports filed. The case remains open but inactive. These things happen, they explained. People have reasons we may never understand. Still, I keep thinking about that shoe and wondering why someone would leave wearing only one. Story 5. The wooden porch creaked softly under a gentle morning breeze, carrying the sweet scent of freshly cut grass. Inside, everything seemed untouched, the old radio humming faintly, a stack of yesterday's mail on the side table, and the faint echo of last night's rain lingering in the air. Yet as I closed the screen door behind me, my eyes were drawn to the kitchen floor where a single damp footprint glistened ominously, the surrounding tiles dry and unmarked. I keep coming back to that footprint, the shape of it, the way the water caught the light from the window, making it look almost deliberate, like someone had placed it there for me to find. But that doesn't make sense, does it? Nothing about that morning makes sense when I try to piece it together now. The radio was playing something I recognized, but I can't remember the song. The mail, was it really from yesterday? I thought I'd checked the box the night before, but maybe I hadn't. Maybe I'm mixing up the days again. The footprint was small, smaller than mine. I remember crouching down, studying the ridges and curves pressed into the dampness. A bare foot, definitely. The arch was pronounced, delicate almost. I should have taken a picture, but instead I just stared until the water began to evaporate at the edges. You're imagining things again. That voice, it comes to me in fragments now, always interrupting my thoughts when I try to focus on the details. Was someone there with me that morning? The house felt empty, but voices carry differently when you're not expecting them. Sound bounces off walls in ways that make you question what you heard and what you only thought you heard. I stood up too quickly, the kitchen tilted, or maybe I did. My hand found the counter, fingers tracing along the familiar grooves in the wood. Everything else looked normal, the coffee maker still warm from the automatic brew, 2 mugs in the dish rack, though I only remembered using one. Small inconsistencies that gnawed at me even then. The screen door was still swaying slightly when I looked back. Had I really just come through it, or had I been standing in the kitchen longer than I thought? Time felt elastic that morning, stretching and compressing in ways that made me dizzy. I followed the path backward, trying to reconstruct my steps. The porch boards were dry except for a few scattered drops that could have been from the gutters. The yard beyond was emerald green, freshly mowed in neat diagonal stripes. Someone had been working while I slept, but who? And why couldn't I remember arranging for that? The mailbox at the end of the driveway stood open, its red flag down. I walked toward it, my bare feet collecting dew from the grass. Inside, nothing but a lingering smell of paper and metal. The mail I'd seen on the side table. Where had it come from? You never check things properly. There it was again, that voice threading through my consciousness like smoke. It carried a tone of gentle reproach, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I turned around, scanning the windows of neighboring houses, looking for movement behind curtains or shadows that might explain the feeling of being watched. Back inside, the footprint had shrunk. The edges were drying, pulling away from the tile in tiny, irregular patterns. I knelt again, this time placing my own foot beside it for comparison. Mine was longer, wider, with calluses that spoke of different habits, different paths walked. This print was smooth, unmarked by the rough surfaces that shape a foot over time. The radio crackled, catching a different station for a moment before settling back into its gentle hum. In that brief static burst, I thought I heard something else, a whisper, a sigh, maybe just the sound of my own breathing amplified and distorted. I opened the refrigerator without knowing why. Inside, everything appeared normal. Milk that was still good, leftovers in containers I remembered preparing, condiments arranged the way I always kept them. But there was a gap on the middle shelf, a clean rectangle where something had been removed. The outline was faint but unmistakable, like a shadow burned into the white plastic. What had been there? The question lodged itself in my throat, making it hard to swallow. I closed the door and caught my reflection in the stainless steel surface, distorted, stretched, wearing an expression I didn't recognize. My eyes looked hollow, older than I remembered them being. You're forgetting on purpose. The voice was clearer now, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around but found only empty space and the gentle movement of air through the house. The screen door had stopped swaying. The radio continued its quiet, static-tinged melody. The footprint was almost gone. I walked through the other rooms, looking for signs of disturbance or explanation. The living room held its usual collection of books and comfortable furniture, everything positioned exactly as I'd left it, or thought I'd left it. The couch cushions were smooth, unindented, as if no one had sat there in a long time. Upstairs, my bedroom door stood ajar. I always closed it before going to sleep, had done so for years out of habit. The gap was just wide enough for someone to slip through sideways, careful not to let the hinges creak. Inside, the bed was unmade on both sides. Both sides. I stared at the rumpled sheets, the two depressions in the pillows, trying to remember. Had I been restless? Did I roll back and forth during the night, creating that second impression? The pillow on the right side of the bed smelled different when I leaned close. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar, like rain and something else I couldn't identify. The bathroom mirror reflected a face I was still learning to recognize. There were marks on my arms I didn't remember getting, not injuries, just faint impressions like someone had gripped me gently but persistently. They were already fading as I watched, disappearing into the paleness of my skin. Downstairs again, the footprint was completely gone. The tile showed no trace of moisture. no indication that anything unusual had happened, but I could still see it in my mind, perfect in its isolation, mysterious in its implications. The image had burned itself into my memory with an intensity that felt disproportionate to its apparent significance. You saw what you needed to see. This time the voice seemed to come from inside my own head, indistinguishable from my thoughts except for its tone of gentle authority. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to organize the fragments into something coherent. The footprint, the voice, the mail that might not have been yesterday's, the gap in the refrigerator, the unmade bed, the smell on the pillow, the mowed lawn, the open bedroom door. Each detail felt important, but they wouldn't connect in any logical sequence. Every time I tried to build a narrative, pieces would slip away or contradict each other. Had the events happened in the order I remembered them? Had they happened at all? I found myself checking the kitchen floor repeatedly throughout that day, looking for new prints or traces of the old one. The tiles remained stubbornly clean, reflecting the afternoon light that streamed through the windows, but sometimes when I approached from a certain angle, I thought I could see the ghost of that impression, faint as breath on glass. The radio played the same soft, static-laced melody all day. I tried changing the station, but it always drifted back to that frequency, as if it were the only signal strong enough to reach the house. The sound became hypnotic, a backdrop to my circling thoughts and growing unease. You're not supposed to remember everything. The voice came more frequently now, sometimes interrupting me mid-thought, sometimes seeming to respond to questions I hadn't asked aloud. It was becoming harder to distinguish between external sound and internal dialogue, between memory and imagination. That evening I sat on the front porch as darkness gathered around the house. The freshly cut grass released its green scent into the cooling air, mixing with the lingering smell of rain from gutters and downspouts. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of water dripping, though I couldn't identify its source. The mailbox stood closed now, its red flag up. I didn't remember raising it, didn't remember putting anything inside for pickup, but there it was, a small beacon of purpose in the gathering dusk. I walked down the driveway, my bare feet finding every pebble and crack in the asphalt. Inside the mailbox, a single envelope waited. No address, no stamp, just my name written in handwriting I should have recognized but didn't. The paper felt expensive, heavier than ordinary stationery. I held it up to the streetlight, trying to see through the envelope, but the contents remained mysterious. Back on the porch, I turned the envelope over and over in my hands. The flap wasn't sealed, just tucked closed with a kind of casual intimacy that suggested familiarity between sender and recipient. But I couldn't bring myself to open it. Something about the weight of it, the quality of the paper, the careful formation of the letters in my name, it all felt too significant, too loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. Some things are better left unopened. The voice carried a note of warning now, gentle but insistent. I looked around the darkening yard, half expecting to see a figure standing among the shadows, but found only the familiar shapes of trees and shrubs transformed by the absence of light. I went inside, leaving the envelope on the kitchen counter. The house felt different in the darkness, fuller somehow, as if the empty spaces had been occupied while I was outside. I moved through the rooms without turning on lights, guided by memory and the faint glow from street lamps filtering through windows. In the kitchen, I knelt on the floor where the footprint had been. The tiles were cool against my palms, smooth and unforgiving. I pressed my cheek to the surface, trying to sense any lingering trace of moisture or warmth. Nothing. But as I lay there in the darkness, I began to hear other sounds, the soft whisper of air moving through the house, the gentle settling of wood and metal, the distant hum of electrical current in the walls. And underneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, the sound of breathing that wasn't my own. I stayed on the floor for a long time listening. The breathing seemed to move through the house, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always just at the edge of audibility. It had a rhythm different from mine, slower and deeper, like someone in the deepest stages of sleep. When I finally stood, the envelope was gone from the counter. I searched the kitchen, then the rest of the house, but found no trace of it. The counter showed no indication that anything had been there, no water ring, no impression in dust that didn't exist, no lingering scent of expensive paper. But I could still feel the weight of it in my hands, still see the careful loops and curves of my name written in that almost familiar script. You opened it. The voice was so clear now it might have been someone standing beside me. I turned, half expecting to see a face in the darkness, but found only empty air and the soft sounds of the house breathing around me. Had I opened it, the memory felt both foreign and familiar, like trying to recall a dream after waking. I could almost see my fingers working at the envelope flap, almost feel the paper sliding free, almost hear the whisper of unfolding. But the content remained locked away, hidden behind a wall of forgetting that felt both natural and imposed. I went upstairs, drawn by an exhaustion that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical fatigue. The bedroom door was closed now, though I didn't remember shutting it. Inside, the bed was made with hospital corners and smooth surfaces that showed no sign of recent occupation. But the pillow on the right side still carried that faint, unfamiliar scent. I lay down on the left side, my usual side, and stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, I could hear the house settling around me, wood and metal adjusting to the cooling night air. The sounds were familiar, comforting in their predictability, but underneath them I could still detect that other breathing, soft and regular, coming from somewhere I couldn't identify. Sleep came in fragments, broken by moments of startling clarity where I would remember something important to face, a conversation, a decision only to have it slip away as soon as I tried to focus on it. In the spaces between sleep and waking, the voice continued its gentle commentary, offering observations and reassurances that felt both helpful and somehow threatening. You're safe for not knowing. Some memories are too heavy to carry. Trust the forgetting. I woke to the sound of the screen door creaking in a morning breeze. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the lingering dampness of night rain. Downstairs, the radio hummed its familiar static-laced melody, and I could hear the soft rustle of paper that might have been mail settling on the side table. I descended the stairs slowly, each step bringing back fragments of the previous day, the footprint, the voice, the envelope that might or might not have existed. At the bottom, I paused, looking toward the kitchen with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The tiles were dry and unmarked, reflecting the morning light in patterns that shifted with the movement of tree branches outside the windows. Everything appeared normal, untouched, exactly as it should be. But as I stepped into the kitchen, my eyes were drawn to the floor where a single damp footprint glistened ominously, the surrounding tiles dry and unmarked. The same footprint, or was it? This one seemed slightly different, the arch less pronounced, the toes more spread, as if the person who made it had been carrying more weight or moving more carefully. But maybe that was just my imagination, my mind trying to create significance where none existed. I knelt beside it, studying the familiar yet strange impression. The water was warm this time, as if it had been made recently, perhaps while I was still upstairs. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You're beginning to understand." The voice was softer now, more intimate, as if its speaker had moved closer during the night. I looked around the empty kitchen, my eyes lingering on shadows that might have concealed a figure, corners that seemed deeper than they should be. The radio crackled, catching a different frequency for a moment. In the brief burst of static, I heard something that might have been my name, spoken in a tone of gentle familiarity. But when the signal cleared, there was only the same endless melody, soft and hypnotic and somehow expectant. I pressed my palm to the floor beside the footprint, feeling the cool smoothness of the tile against my skin. My hand looked pale and unfamiliar in the morning light, marked with faint impressions I didn't remember acquiring. As I watched, the footprint began to evaporate at the edges, pulling away from the tile in tiny, irregular patterns that reminded me of something I couldn't quite grasp. The memory was there, just out of reach, waiting for me to stop trying so hard to capture it. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift, following the scent of rain and grass and something else, something that carried the weight of recognition without the clarity of understanding. When I opened my eyes, the footprint was gone, but the feeling remained, that sense of presence, of significance, of something important hovering just beyond the edges of my perception. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the movement, and looked around the kitchen one more time. Everything was exactly as it should be, and that somehow was the most disturbing thing of all. Story 6. The latch didn't click back into place. My fingers brushed over its cold surface, accustomed to the familiar sensation of metal catching metal, but it swung open noiselessly. The hallway ahead seemed to swallow my footsteps, absorbing each tread without a trace. I paused by the coat rack, typically a source of cluttered comfort, now strangely void of the predictable tingling of fabric against my skin. A sense of emptiness with substance lingered, filling the spaces in between. As I reached out for the light switch, the wall beneath my hand felt unfamiliar, smooth where there should be indentations. The light stayed dim. It was then I noticed her coat was still gone, and I wondered what else might be missing. The coffee cup sits on the counter, half empty. The ring it left on the wood surface is darker than it should be, as if it's been sitting there longer than I remember. Steam no longer rises from the liquid inside. When did I pour it? The kitchen window overlooks the back garden, but the view feels altered somehow, like looking at a photograph of a place you once knew intimately. I keep returning to the sound of her keys, not the jingling as she walked through the door, but the absence of that sound. The silence where familiar noise should live. My ears strain for echoes that never come, searching for patterns in the quiet that stretches between rooms like invisible thread. The neighbor mentioned seeing her car in the driveway. When I asked which morning, she tilted her head and said it was difficult to remember exactly. These details blur together, she explained, when you're not really paying attention. But I was paying attention. I always pay attention. Her toothbrush is dry. This observation arrives without context, floating in my consciousness like debris after a flood. I touch the bristles with my fingertip and they feel brittle, unused. The bathroom mirror reflects my face, but I look different somehow. Older maybe, or just tired in a way that sleep won't fix. The photographs on the mantel seem arranged differently, not moved exactly, but shifted in some subtle way that makes me question my own memory. In one image, she's laughing at something outside the frame. Her eyes crinkle at the corners, genuine joy captured in silver and shadow. I study her expression, searching for clues I might have missed before. There's a voicemail on my phone from her sister, asking if everything is all right. The timestamp shows it was left several hours ago, but I don't remember hearing it ring. The message plays on speaker, her sister's voice filling the empty kitchen with concern I can't quite explain away. She mentions trying to reach her for days. The basement door stands slightly ajar. I don't recall opening it, but then again, I don't recall many things lately. The darkness beyond the threshold seems thicker than ordinary shadow, more substantial. A cool draft rises from below, carrying scents I can't identify but somehow recognize. I find myself checking her closet repeatedly. Each time the same clothes hang in the same positions, but something feels diminished, as if the space itself has contracted, grown smaller in her absence. Her perfume bottle sits on the dresser, nearly empty now. When did she use so much of it? The police officer who came to the door had kind eyes but asked difficult questions. He wanted to know about our relationship, about any arguments we might have had. I told him we were happy, that she wouldn't just leave without saying anything. He nodded and made notes in a small pad, his pen scratching against paper in the silence between my answers. Sleep comes in fragments now. I wake to sounds that might be the house settling or might be something else entirely. The floorboards in the hallway creak in a pattern that suggests footsteps, but when I investigate, I find only empty rooms and shadows that retreat from my presence. Her laptop remains open on the kitchen table, the screen dark but still warm to the touch. When I move the mouse, it awakens to reveal a browser window with several tabs open. Travel websites mostly, destinations I don't recognize, places we never discussed visiting together. The search history tells a story I'm not sure I want to read. The garden shows signs of recent digging. Fresh earth turned over near the rose bushes, though I don't remember planting anything new. The soil is dark and rich, different from the clay that usually dominates our yard. My hands are dirty when I come back inside, though I can't recall kneeling down to examine the ground more closely. I call her phone repeatedly, listening to it ring and ring before going to voicemail. Her voice, recorded in happier times, asks the caller to leave a message. I hang up without speaking, then dial again immediately. This ritual becomes routine, comforting in its predictability even as it confirms her absence. The grocery store receipt in her purse shows purchases I don't remember her making. Bleach, heavy-duty garbage bags, rubber gloves. Items that seem practical yet somehow ominous in this context. The date on the receipt is difficult to read, smudged as if it got wet and then dried. Her sister calls again. This time I answer, and we have a conversation that feels like walking through fog. She asks direct questions that I answer indirectly, not because I want to mislead her, but because the truth feels slippery, hard to grasp. We agree that someone should file a missing person report. The dreams are always the same. I'm searching for her in rooms that exist nowhere in our actual house, calling her name into spaces that swallow sound completely. Sometimes I find traces of her presence, a scarf draped over a chair, the scent of her shampoo lingering in the air, but she remains just out of reach, always in the next room, always around the next corner. The detective who replaces the uniformed officer asks more pointed questions. She wants to know about insurance policies, about our financial situation, about the state of our marriage. Her questions feel like accusations wrapped in professional courtesy. I answer truthfully, but my words sound hollow even to my own ears. I discover scratches on the basement wall that I've never noticed before. Deep gouges in the concrete, as if something heavy was dragged across the floor. The The marks are fresh, the concrete dust still pale and powdery beneath my fingertips. Above them, a single strand of hair catches the light from the bare bulb overhead. The mailbox fills with sympathy cards from neighbors and friends. Their words of comfort feel premature, as if they know something I don't, or perhaps they see something in my face that I can't see in mirrors. Their kindness carries an undertone of suspicion, gentle but persistent. Her car keys turn up in my jacket pocket, though I have no memory of putting them there. The metal is warm against my palm, worn smooth by her touch. I hold them for a long time, trying to remember the last time I saw her use them, but the memory remains frustratingly out of focus. The phone rings late at night. When I answer, there's only breathing on the other end, soft and steady. I whisper her name into the receiver, but the breathing stops and the line goes dead. The caller ID shows no number, no trace of where the call originated. I find myself standing in the garden again, though I don't remember walking outside. The turned earth looks different in the moonlight, darker and more defined. My bare feet are cold against the grass, and I realize I'm wearing only my pajamas. The shovel leans against the garden shed, its blade clean but somehow expectant. The missing person flyers appear on telephone poles and store windows throughout the neighborhood. Her face smiles out from dozens of photocopied sheets, her eyes following me wherever I go. The phone number listed is mine, and it rings constantly with calls from people who think they've seen her, who want to help, who offer condolences I'm not ready to accept. Her coffee cup is still on the counter when I wake up, though I'm certain I washed it before going to bed. The liquid inside has grown cold again, a skin forming on the surface. I pour it down the sink and watch the dark stream spiral down the drain, carrying with it the last tangible proof of her presence in this house. The detective mentions inconsistencies in my story, though I can't identify what I might have said differently from one conversation to the next. She speaks carefully, watching my face for reactions I'm not sure I'm giving. Her questions circle back to the same themes: my whereabouts, our relationship, the timeline of events I can no longer clearly remember. I stand at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden where the earth remains disturbed. The roses bloom despite the disruption to their roots, their petals a deep red that seems almost black in certain light. I water them carefully, watching the liquid disappear into the soil, and wonder what else might be growing there beneath the surface. Story 7. The doorbell didn't chime. My finger hovered, pressing into the button again, expecting resistance, feeling the absence of its familiar tone. I moved through the foyer, footsteps absorbed by the carpet, greeted only by a muted echo. The walls seemed to watch with a stillness that made me aware of each breath I took. The air was thick, layered, as though it had absorbed stories untold. In the dim hallway, mirrors reflected back something that felt almost right. My touch left no mark on the polished edge. I stared at the surface, unsure if it was reflection or something else entirely. The smell of lavender soap, that's what comes back first, always first. Not the face or the voice or even the reason I was there. Just that clean, artificial sweetness clinging to my nostrils like a memory that won't let go. Sometimes I catch it in public restrooms or hotel lobbies, and my stomach drops before I remember why. I was looking for something. Someone had asked me to look for something. The house felt larger than it should have. Rooms branching off rooms, hallways that seemed to curve back on themselves. I remember checking the same doorframe twice, running my fingers along the wood grain, feeling for scratches that might tell a story. The carpet showed indentations where furniture had been moved recently, heavy pieces, dragged rather than carried. "Did you find it yet?" The voice came from somewhere behind me, but when I turned, the hallway stretched empty. just those mirrors reflecting my confusion back at me, multiplied into infinity. I called out, but heard only my own words bouncing off the walls, distorted and strange. There was a room upstairs. I think it was upstairs. The floorboards creaked in a pattern that felt familiar, like a song I'd heard before but couldn't place. Sunlight filtered through gauze curtains, creating shadows that moved without wind. On the dresser sat a hairbrush with strands still caught in the bristles. Dark hair, longer than mine, with a slight wave that caught the light. I picked up the brush, put it down, picked it up again. The person who lived here collected things, small things, buttons in glass jars, ticket stubs pressed between book pages, photographs with faces carefully cut away. I found myself studying these remnants, trying to piece together a life from fragments, but the more I looked, the less sense it made. The buttons were all different sizes, different materials. The tickets were from places that didn't exist anymore, or maybe never had. You're not supposed to be in here. This time I spun around fast enough to catch something, a flutter of movement at the edge of my vision. But the room remained empty except for dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. The air conditioning kicked on with a mechanical sigh, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I went back downstairs, or maybe I'd never left downstairs. Memory plays tricks when you're trying too hard to remember. The kitchen smelled like coffee that had been brewing too long, bitter and burnt. A cup sat on the counter, still warm, with lipstick marks on the rim. Red lipstick, applied carefully, precisely. The kind of red that leaves stains. I don't wear red lipstick, I never have. The refrigerator hummed a tune I almost recognized. Inside, food arranged with obsessive precision. Condiments lined up by height, vegetables sorted by color, everything labeled with dates written in careful script, but the dates didn't make sense. Some were from next week, some from years ago. Time folded in on itself in this place, refusing to follow rules. There was a basement. I remember the door, heavy wood painted white but chipped around the edges where hands had gripped too tightly. The key hung on a hook nearby, as if someone wanted it to be found, as if someone was expecting me to look. I held the key but didn't use it. Not yet, not that time. The living room felt staged, like a photograph in a magazine. Cushions fluffed just so, books arranged by color rather than subject. But underneath the perfection, things felt wrong. A coffee table with one leg slightly shorter than the others. Picture frames that held images of strangers smiling at nothing. A television that reflected the room but somehow showed it backwards, as if viewed through a mirror. I sat on the couch and tried to remember why I was there. The cushions were too soft, letting me sink deeper than comfortable. From this angle I could see under the coffee table where something had been scratched into the wood. Letters maybe, or numbers. I got down on my hands and knees to look closer. Help me. 2 words carved with something sharp, the letters uneven like they'd been made in a hurry, or in the dark. I traced them with my finger, feeling the roughness where wood had been gouged away. The scratches were fresh, still pale against the darker stain. You found it. The voice was clearer now, coming from directly behind me. But when I looked, I saw only my own reflection in the television screen, distorted and strange. My face looked different somehow, older or younger, I couldn't tell which. My eyes seemed to hold knowledge I didn't remember acquiring. I stood up too fast and the room tilted. The lavender soap smell grew stronger, mixed now with something else. Something organic and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I followed the scent toward the back of the house, through a dining room where the table was set for 2, but the plates were dusty, unused. The back door stood ajar. Beyond it, a garden grew wild, untended for seasons. Roses climbed over a trellis, their blooms brown and papery. The grass had grown tall enough to hide things. I stepped outside and felt the earth soft beneath my feet, too soft, like it had been recently disturbed. A shovel leaned against the garden shed, its blade caked with dark soil. Beside it, a wheelbarrow with something dark staining the bottom. I approached slowly, my heart beating loud enough to drown out the sound of wind through the overgrown plants. Empty, just stains that could have been anything, rust or mud or something else entirely. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. The house felt different now, more alive somehow, as if my presence had awakened something that had been sleeping. Floorboards creaked overhead, though I was alone on the ground floor. Water ran through pipes in the walls, though I hadn't turned on any faucets. The basement key felt warm in my palm. I'd been carrying it without realizing, my fingers closed around its familiar weight. The door waited at the end of the hall, patient and inevitable. I knew I would open it eventually. I'd always known. But not yet, not while the sun still shone through those gauze curtains. Not while I could still pretend this was just a house, just a place where someone used to live. Not while I could still tell myself I was looking for something instead of running from it. I climbed the stairs again, my hand trailing along the banister. The wood was smooth, worn by countless other hands. At the top, a hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe they'd always been there and I'd simply chosen not to see them. Behind one door, the sound of running water. Behind another, music playing softly, a song I recognized but couldn't name. I pressed my ear against each door in turn, listening for signs of life in a house that should have been empty. The bathroom at the end of the hall smelled like lavender soap. The sink was wet, as if recently used. In the mirror above it, I saw my reflection looking back with eyes that seemed to belong to someone else. Someone who knew things I didn't want to know. I opened the medicine cabinet. Inside, prescription bottles with names scratched off, their contents rattling like small bones. Razors still sharp enough to catch the light. A tube of red lipstick, worn down to a nub, the same shade that had marked the coffee cup downstairs. I closed the cabinet and my reflection disappeared, replaced by the plain white of the mirror's back. For a moment, I felt relief. Then I realized I could still see those strange eyes watching me from somewhere beyond the glass. The bedroom door was closed but not locked. Inside, a bed made with military precision, its corners sharp enough to cut. On the nightstand, a glass of water with dust floating on its surface. A book open to a page with certain words circled in red ink. Remember, forget, choose, lose. I sat on the edge of the bed and the mattress barely gave under my weight. From here, I could see out the window to the garden below, where shadows moved between the overgrown plants. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. Only when I looked away did I catch movement in my peripheral vision. The closet door stood open, revealing clothes hung in perfect order, but they were all the wrong size, too small or too large, as if they'd belonged to different people entirely. At the bottom, shoes arranged in pairs but none of them matching, a collection of lives that didn't quite fit together. I found myself downstairs again without remembering the journey. Time moved strangely in this place, folding back on itself like origami. The basement key was still in my hand, its metal warm from my grip. The door waited where it had always waited, patient and knowing. This time I used the key. The lock turned easily, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The door swung open to reveal stairs descending into darkness. Cool air rose from below, carrying scents of earth and something else. Something familiar that made my stomach clench with recognition I couldn't name. I found a light switch and pressed it. A single bulb illuminated wooden steps worn smooth by use. At the bottom, concrete floor and walls that seemed to absorb sound. The basement was larger than the house above it should have allowed, stretching back into shadows that the single bulb couldn't penetrate. Along one wall, shelves lined with jars. Inside each jar, things floating in clear liquid. Small things that might have been specimens or might have been something else entirely. Labels written in that same careful script, but the writing had faded until only the shapes of words remained. A workbench dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred by years of use. Tools hung on pegboard above it, each outline traced so their absence would be immediately noticed. But several tools were missing, their shadows marking empty spaces like wounds. I approached the bench slowly. Its surface was stained dark in places, the wood grain raised where liquid had soaked in and dried. Scratches marked the wood, some deep enough to catch my fingernail. Among them I found more words carved with desperate urgency. Help me, please, remember. The same handwriting as upstairs, the same plea repeated over and over, as if the writer had forgotten making it the first time. Behind the workbench another door, this one newer, its paint still fresh. No key hung nearby, but when I tried the handle it turned easily. Beyond it, a smaller room with no windows, no light except what spilled in from behind me. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all showing the same scene from different angles. The garden, the soft earth, the shovel and wheelbarrow. But in these photos the garden looked different, neat and tended, with flowers blooming in careful rows. And in some of the pictures, someone was working among the plants, their face always turned away from the camera or hidden by shadow. I stepped closer to examine the photos. In the corner of each one, a date stamp in red numbers, but like everything else in this house, the dates made no sense. Some were from the future, some from a past so distant it couldn't be right. Time moved differently here, or maybe time had stopped altogether. One photograph caught my attention. In it, the garden looked exactly as it did now, overgrown and wild. But standing among the tall grass was a figure I almost recognized. The photo was blurry, as if taken in haste, but something about the stance, the way the person held their head, seemed familiar. I pulled the photo from the wall and held it closer to the light. The figure was small, partially hidden by the overgrown plants, but their hand was visible, reaching towards something in the earth, and on their wrist, a watch that caught the light just so. I looked down at my own wrist, the same watch, its face cracked but still keeping time. When had I put it on? I couldn't remember. But there it was, marking moments in a place where time had no meaning. The lavender soap smell was stronger down here, mixed with earth and that sweet organic scent I'd noticed before. I followed it deeper into the basement, past rooms I hadn't seen before. A laundry room with clothes still damp on the line. A storage room filled with boxes labeled in that careful script. A workshop where half-finished projects sat abandoned, as if their maker had been called away suddenly. At the very back, another staircase leading up. These steps were newer, made of concrete instead of wood. They led to a door I didn't recognize, though I'd walked every inch of the house above. When I opened it, I found myself in the garden, standing among the tall grass where the figure in the photograph had stood. The earth was soft beneath my feet, softer than earth should be. I knelt and pressed my palm against the ground, feeling it give under the pressure. Something was buried here, something that had disturbed the natural order of soil and root and stone. The shovel waited against the shed, patient as everything else in this place. I picked it up and felt its weight, familiar in my hands as if I'd held it before. The blade was clean now, but scratches in the metal told stories of previous use. I began to dig. The soil came away easily, too easily, as if it had been moved before and was simply returning to a shape it remembered. With each shovelful, the sweet organic smell grew stronger. Flowers left too long in water, fruit fallen from trees and forgotten, life returning to the earth in the way life always does. But I stopped before I found what I was looking for. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry, some truths too sharp to hold. I filled in the hole and smoothed the earth, leaving no trace of my investigation. The garden kept its secrets, as it always had. Back inside the house, I climbed the stairs from the basement and locked the door behind me. The key felt different now, heavier with the weight of what it protected. I hung it on its hook and walked away, but I could feel it watching me go. The mirrors in the hallway reflected someone I almost recognized. Someone who had been here before, who had walked these rooms and breathed this air and made choices that echoed through time. Someone who had carved desperate words into wood and taken photographs of things that shouldn't be photographed and buried secrets in soft earth. Someone who wore my face but held knowledge I couldn't access. I found myself at the front door, though I didn't remember walking there. My hand was on the handle, ready to turn it and step back into a world where time moved forward and mirrors showed only what stood before them. But something held me back, some unfinished business that tugged at the edges of my memory. The doorbell, I'd come here because the doorbell didn't chime. But now I couldn't remember who had told me about it, or why it mattered, or what I was supposed to do about a broken doorbell in a house that felt like a tomb. I pressed the button from inside and heard nothing, just as before. The silence stretched around me like a living thing. I opened the door and stepped outside. The world beyond the house looked different now, too bright and too sharp after the muted tones of the interior. Colors seemed artificial, sounds too loud. I walked to the street and turned back to look at the house, trying to see it as a stranger would. Just a house, just windows and walls and a door that needed fixing. Just a garden that needed tending and rooms that needed airing out. Nothing sinister or strange, nothing that would make a person's heart race or their hands shake. But I knew I would be back. Something in that house was waiting for me, something I'd left unfinished. The basement key would call to me in dreams, and the lavender soap smell would follow me through my daily life, and eventually I would find myself standing at that front door again, pressing a button that wouldn't chime. Because some stories don't end. They just pause, waiting for the next person to walk through the door and pick up the threads. Waiting for someone else to hold the key and follow the smell and dig in the soft earth until they find what's been buried there all along. The mirrors would show them someone they almost recognized. The photographs would reveal truths they'd forgotten. And in the end, they would stand where I stood now, looking back at a house that held more questions than answers, more shadows than light. The doorbell still doesn't chime. My finger hovers over the button, expecting resistance, feeling the absence of its familiar tone. But now I know why it's silent and why it needs to stay that way. Some doors shouldn't announce when they're opened. Some visitors are better left unannounced. The lavender soap smell clings to my clothes, my hair, my skin. It follows me home and into my dreams, a reminder of things I've seen and choices I've made and truths I've buried in soft earth. And sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, I remember everything. But only sometimes, only when the memory is too strong to repress and too important to forget. The rest of the time, I tell myself it was just a house, just a broken doorbell, just shadows playing tricks on tired eyes. Just a story I tell myself to make sense of the fragments. Story 8. The envelope. The early morning mist clung to the roadside, shrouding the street in a soft, gray veil. The hum of distant traffic faded into the background as I approached the small row of weathered mailboxes lining the sidewalk. My fingers brushed the cold metal of ours, its lid slightly ajar, revealing a shadowy void within. Inside, a single envelope, crisp and white, sat untouched, an anomaly in our usually brimming box. A shiver raced down my spine as I noticed the damp earth beneath, oddly disturbed and leading to a narrow gap in the hedge. The air felt heavy with secrets, as if the ground itself was whispering warnings left unspoken. I pulled the envelope from the mailbox, feeling its unusual weight in my palm. No return address marked its surface, just my name written in careful block letters that seemed somehow familiar yet impossible to place. The paper felt expensive, too formal for the usual bills and advertisements that filled our daily mail. As I turned it over, the sealed flap revealed no clues about its sender. The walk back to the house felt longer than usual. Each step seemed to echo against the morning silence, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder at the disturbed earth by the mailbox. Something about that small patch of soil bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. It looked deliberate, as if someone had been digging or searching for something in the dark. Inside, I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and stared at it while the coffee brewed. The familiar sounds of morning routine felt muted, overshadowed by this simple piece of mail that had somehow disrupted my sense of normalcy. When I finally opened it, my hands trembled slightly as I unfolded a single sheet of paper. The message was brief. She knows what you did. The truth always surfaces. No signature, no explanation, just those 8 words that seemed to burn themselves into my vision as I read them over and over. My mind raced through possibilities, searching for some logical explanation. A prank from a neighbor, a case of mistaken identity, anything that would make this anonymous accusation disappear. But deep in my chest, a cold weight had settled, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew exactly what this was about. The incident happened during the summer months when the heat made everything feel sluggish and dreamlike. I had been working late shifts at the office, coming home to find my spouse already asleep, the house dark except for the porch light we always left burning. It was during one of these late returns that I first noticed her. She lived 3 houses down in the blue cottage with the overgrown garden. I had seen her before in passing, a woman probably in her 30s with dark hair that she often wore in a loose bun. She had a habit of sitting on her front steps in the evenings, smoking and watching the street with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The first time our eyes met, I felt caught in something I couldn't name. She didn't look away when I nodded politely. Instead, she held my gaze with a slight smile that seemed to know something about me that I didn't know myself. From that moment, I found myself taking longer routes home, timing my arrival to coincide with her evening ritual. What started as curious glances became deliberate encounters. I would find excuses to walk past her house, to linger at the corner store where she sometimes shopped, to be in places where our paths might cross. She seemed to understand this unspoken game, appearing at her mailbox when I retrieved mine, taking walks that coincidentally followed my jogging route. We never spoke during those initial weeks. The tension built through exchanged looks and careful timing, a dangerous dance that I knew was leading somewhere I shouldn't go. But the thrill of it, the way it made my pulse quicken and my ordinary life feel suddenly electric, was intoxicating. The first conversation happened on a particularly humid evening when I found her struggling with a heavy bag of groceries at her front gate. I offered to help, and she accepted with that same knowing smile. Her voice was softer than I had imagined, with a slight accent I couldn't place. She invited me in for water, and I followed her into the cool darkness of her house. The interior was sparse but carefully arranged, books stacked on every surface, plants hanging in the windows, and photographs covering one entire wall. I found myself studying those pictures while she moved around the kitchen. They showed her in various locations, always alone, always with that same enigmatic expression. In some, she looked younger. In others, her hair was different, her clothes suggesting different seasons, different years. "You're very observant," she said from behind me, making me jump. I hadn't heard her approach. "Sorry, I was just looking." "Most people don't really look, they see, but they don't look." She handed me a glass of water, her fingers brushing mine as I took it. "You're different." That was how it started, not with grand gestures or obvious seduction, but with her ability to make me feel seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the following weeks, I found myself visiting her house regularly, always with some excuse, always telling myself it was harmless. She had a way of listening that made me want to tell her everything, about my marriage that had grown comfortable but distant, about my job that felt meaningless, about the dreams I'd abandoned and the person I sometimes felt I was pretending to be. She absorbed it all without judgment, asking questions that made me think about myself in ways I never had. But she revealed very little about herself. When I asked about her work, she was vague. When I inquired about her past, she deflected with questions about mine. The photographs on her wall remained unexplained, and I began to notice that she never received mail, never had visitors, never seemed to have any connection to the normal rhythms of neighborhood life. The physical relationship developed gradually, almost inevitably. It began with longer touches when she handed me drinks, with sitting closer together on her couch, with the way she would look at my mouth when I spoke. The first kiss happened during a thunderstorm, when the power had gone out and we were sitting in her living room by candlelight. What followed was intense in a way that frightened me, not just the physical intimacy, but the emotional connection that seemed to bypass all my usual defenses. She had a way of making me feel like I was discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. When I was with her, my ordinary life felt like a costume I had been wearing without realizing it. But even in those moments of closest connection, there was something held back in her. Something watchful and calculating that I chose to ignore because acknowledging it would have meant questioning everything about what we were doing. The change began subtly. She started asking more specific questions about my schedule, about my spouse's routine, about our house and our habits. At first, I assumed it was natural curiosity, the kind of details lovers share. But gradually, I realized she was mapping out our lives with a precision that felt purposeful. She began making comments about my marriage that were more pointed, more judgmental. She would suggest that my spouse didn't appreciate me, didn't understand me the way she did. She started painting pictures of a different life we could have together if only I was brave enough to take what I really wanted. The pressure was subtle but constant. She never directly asked me to leave my marriage, but she created an atmosphere where staying felt like cowardice and leaving felt like the only authentic choice. When I expressed doubt or guilt, she would withdraw emotionally, making me feel like I was losing something precious. It was during this period that I began noticing small things that disturbed me. Items in my house that seemed to have been moved slightly, a feeling that someone had been in our yard when we weren't home. My spouse mentioned strange calls where no one spoke when they answered. I dismissed these incidents as coincidence or imagination, but they created an underlying tension that made me jumpy and paranoid. The situation reached a breaking point during a weekend when my spouse was visiting relatives. She had invited me to spend the entire time at her house, and I had agreed, telling myself this would help me decide what I really wanted. But instead of the romantic escape I had imagined, those days revealed aspects of her personality that I had been willfully ignoring. She became possessive in a way that felt suffocating. She wanted to know where I was every moment, became upset when I needed to go home to check on things or return calls. She went through my phone while I was sleeping, confronting me about contacts and messages that were completely innocent. When I tried to address her behavior, she would flip between tearful apologies and cold anger that made me feel like I was walking on glass. On the final night, I woke to find her standing at the bedroom window, staring toward my house in the darkness. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was making sure my spouse hadn't come home early. But something about her posture, about the intensity of her focus, made my skin crawl. I realized I didn't really know this person I had been so intimate with, and the recognition filled me with a fear I couldn't name. I left early the next morning, telling her I needed time to think. She didn't argue, but her smile as I walked away felt more like a threat than understanding. That was the last time I spoke to her directly. But it wasn't the last time I saw her. Over the following days, she seemed to be everywhere, walking past my office building when I left for lunch, in the grocery store when I stopped after work, sitting in a car parked across from our house when I looked out the window late at night. She never approached or tried to talk to me, but her presence felt like a constant reminder of something unfinished. My spouse began asking if I was feeling all right, noting that I seemed distracted and nervous. I wanted to confess everything, to explain why I was jumping at unexpected sounds and checking the locks obsessively, but I couldn't find the words. The weight of what I had done, combined with my growing fear of her reaction to my withdrawal, created a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe normally. Then, just as suddenly as the surveillance had begun, it stopped. I didn't see her for several days, and I began to hope that she had accepted my decision and moved on. When I finally worked up the courage to walk past her house, I found it empty. The windows were dark, the mailbox overflowing with accumulated mail, the garden looking abandoned. Neighbors I spoke to said they hadn't seen her in over a week. Some thought she might have moved away suddenly, though no one had seen a moving truck or any signs of packing. Her disappearance was as mysterious as everything else about her had been. I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt a growing unease that I couldn't shake. The empty house seemed to watch me whenever I passed it, and I found myself wondering what had happened to her, where she had gone, and whether her absence was really as final as it appeared. Now, holding this anonymous note, all those suppressed fears came rushing back. The careful handwriting looked familiar, though I couldn't place it definitively. The tone of accusation suggested someone who knew intimate details about my life, about choices I had made that I'd never discussed with anyone. I spent the morning researching ways to trace anonymous mail, reading about handwriting analysis and postmark examination. But the envelope offered no useful clues. The postmark was local, but from a post office that served several surrounding neighborhoods. The paper was generic, available at any office supply store. The phrase, "the truth always surfaces," echoed in my mind as I went through my daily routine. What truth was the sender referring to? My affair was over, ended by my own choice and her mysterious departure. My spouse had never discovered it, and I had no intention of confessing something that would only cause pain without serving any constructive purpose. But as the day progressed, I began to wonder if there were aspects of the situation that I had never fully understood. Her sudden appearance in my life, her deliberate cultivation of our relationship, her intense interest in the details of my daily routine, and then her equally sudden disappearance. What if I had been part of something larger than a simple affair? That evening, I found myself walking past her house again. It still looked abandoned, but something made me stop and study it more carefully. The mailbox, which had been overflowing when I last checked, was now empty. Fresh tire tracks marked the driveway, and one of the upstairs windows that had been dark was now reflecting light as if someone was inside. My heart began to race as I realized she might have returned, but instead of the relief or excitement I might have expected, I felt only dread. The anonymous note had changed something fundamental about how I understood our relationship, and seeing evidence of her presence felt more like a threat than an opportunity. I hurried home and spent the evening researching her name online, something I realized I had never done during our relationship. What I found disturbed me more than I could have imagined. There were no social media profiles, no professional listings, no public records that I could locate. It was as if the identity she had presented to me was completely fabricated. Digging deeper, I found news articles from other areas about women matching her description who had been involved in various incidents. Identity theft, insurance fraud, a suspicious disappearance of a married man who had been having an affair. The details were vague and the connections circumstantial, but a pattern seemed to emerge of someone who targeted married men, developed intense relationships with them, and then disappeared, leaving behind financial or legal complications. The realization that I might have been deliberately selected and manipulated hit me like a physical blow. Every intimate conversation, every moment of connection that had felt so genuine, might have been calculated steps in some larger scheme that I was too naive to recognize. But what was the scheme? I hadn't given her money or access to my accounts. She had never asked for financial help or expensive gifts. If she was running some kind of con, I couldn't identify what she had taken from me besides time and emotional energy. Unless the con was still running. The thought made me check all my accounts, my credit reports, any official documents that might have been compromised. Everything appeared normal, but I realized that some types of damage might not be immediately apparent. Identity theft could take months to surface. Financial fraud could be carefully orchestrated to avoid detection until it was too late to prevent. Over the next few days, I found myself obsessively checking for signs that my life had been compromised in ways I couldn't yet see. I changed passwords, monitored accounts, and even considered hiring a private investigator to look into her background more thoroughly. But it was my spouse who noticed the change in my behavior first. "You've been acting strange lately," they said over dinner, studying my face with concern. "Distracted, worried about something. Is everything okay at work?" I wanted to deflect, to offer some simple explanation that would satisfy their curiosity without opening a conversation I wasn't prepared to have. But looking at their familiar face, seeing genuine care and concern, I felt the weight of my deception more heavily than ever before. "I've been getting some strange mail," I said, which was true enough without being complete. Anonymous messages that seemed to be some kind of prank or mistake. "What kind of messages?" I showed them the note, watching their expression change as they read it. They looked up at me with confusion and something that might have been suspicion. "What does this mean? What are they saying you did?" "I have no idea. That's what's been bothering me. It feels like someone has me confused with someone else, or it's some kind of harassment." They studied the note more carefully, turning it over and examining the envelope. The handwriting looks deliberate, not like a random prank, and they know your name, your address. This feels personal. Their observation made my stomach clench. Of course it looked personal because it was personal. The sender knew exactly who I was and what I had done. The question was what they wanted and how far they were willing to go to get it. Maybe we should report it to the police, my spouse suggested. Anonymous threats might be something they can trace. The suggestion terrified me. Police involvement would mean questions I wasn't prepared to answer, investigations that might uncover the affair, official scrutiny of a situation I desperately wanted to keep private. But refusing their suggestion would only raise more questions about why I was reluctant to involve authorities. "Let me think about it," I said. "Maybe if I get more messages, but one note might not be enough for them to take seriously." That night I lay awake listening to the sounds of the house settling around us. Every creak felt significant. Every shadow outside the window seemed to move with purpose. The fear that had been building since I received the note was evolving into something more specific, a growing certainty that my anonymous correspondent wasn't finished with me. The second note arrived 3 days later, this time slipped under our front door during the night. I found it when I went to retrieve the morning paper, another white envelope with my name written in the same careful block letters. This time, the message was longer. "You thought you could just walk away. You thought she would disappear and your secret would be safe. But some secrets have a price. Check your bank account." My hands shook as I read the words. The reference to checking my bank account suggested that whatever this person wanted, it was going to cost me financially. I rushed to my computer and logged into all my accounts, searching for any unauthorized transactions or unusual activity. Everything appeared normal, but the suggestion that I should be looking made me paranoid about every charge, every automatic payment, every routine transaction. Was this psychological warfare designed to make me question everything, or was there really something I wasn't seeing? I spent the morning calling my bank, my credit card companies, anyone who might be able to detect fraudulent activity that I was missing. The customer service representatives were polite but couldn't identify any problems with my accounts. If someone was stealing from me, they were doing it in a way that wasn't immediately apparent. The phrase, "some secrets have a price," echoed in my mind as I tried to focus on work. It suggested that the anonymous sender wanted money, that this was ultimately about extortion rather than revenge. But how much would they want, and what guarantee did I have that paying would actually end the harassment? More disturbing was the reference to her disappearance. "You thought she would disappear" implied that the sender knew about our relationship, knew that it had ended, and knew that I had been relieved by her absence. This wasn't someone guessing about my personal life. This was someone with intimate knowledge of what had happened between us. The possibility that she was behind the note seemed obvious, but something about that explanation didn't fit. The tone of the messages suggested someone observing our relationship from outside, someone who knew what had happened but hadn't been directly involved. If she wanted money or revenge, why not approach me directly? Why the elaborate anonymous campaign? Unless she wasn't able to approach me directly, unless something had happened to her that prevented her from handling this personally. The thought sent a chill through me that I couldn't shake. What if her disappearance hadn't been voluntary? What if someone else knew about our affair because they had discovered it through her? What if the person sending these notes had access to her personal information, her knowledge of my life because they had access to her? I found myself remembering details about her that had seemed insignificant at the time. The way she had sometimes seemed nervous when we were together, looking over her shoulder or checking her phone with an expression of worry. The fact that she had never talked about friends or family, never mentioned anyone else in her life who might be concerned about her well-being. What if she had been involved with dangerous people? What if our affair had somehow put both of us at risk in ways I never understood? The possibility that I might be dealing with someone who had harmed her, someone who was now using their knowledge of our relationship to threaten me, made my fear evolve into something much darker. That evening I drove past her house again, this time parking across the street to observe it more carefully. The windows were still dark, but the mailbox remained empty, and the tire tracks in the driveway looked fresh. Someone was definitely coming and going from the property, but I couldn't tell if it was her or someone else. As I sat there, I noticed a car parked further down the street that seemed to be occupied. The figure behind the wheel was too far away to identify, but something about their stillness, their focus on the same house I was watching, made me realize I might not be the only one conducting surveillance. The recognition that someone else was watching her house filled me with a panic that made it hard to think clearly. I started my car and drove home, checking my mirrors obsessively to see if I was being followed. The paranoia that had been building since the first note was now consuming every aspect of my daily life. At home, I found my spouse waiting for me with a concerned expression. "Where were you? You said you were running errands, but you've been gone for hours." I realized I had lost track of time, that my obsession with understanding what was happening to me was starting to affect my ability to maintain normal routines. The lies I was telling to cover my investigation were becoming as complicated as the original deception I was trying to protect. I was driving around thinking about those notes, trying to figure out who might be sending them. "Did you come up with any ideas?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to address. My spouse was asking not just about the notes, but about what I might have done to provoke them. Their tone suggested they were beginning to suspect that my explanation wasn't complete. I keep thinking it might be related to work, someone who feels they were treated unfairly, maybe someone who was passed over for a promotion or laid off. The kind of person who might blame me for decisions that weren't really mine to make. It was a plausible lie, but I could see in their eyes that they weren't entirely convinced. The foundation of trust in our marriage, already weakened by my affair, was being further eroded by my continued deception about the harassment. That night I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to break into her house. The plan was simple but risky. I would wait until very late when the neighborhood was asleep and use the spare key I remembered seeing her retrieve from under a flower pot by her back door. If she was living there again, I would retreat immediately. If the house was empty, I would search for any clues about who she really was and what had happened to her. The decision felt like crossing a line that would change everything about who I was. I had never broken into anyone's property, never committed any crime more serious than speeding. But the alternative was to remain trapped in this nightmare of uncertainty, never knowing who was threatening me or what they ultimately wanted. I waited until well after midnight before leaving the house. The streets were empty, lit only by occasional streetlights that created pools of yellow illumination separated by deep shadows. Her house looked exactly as it had during my earlier surveillance, dark and apparently empty. The spare key was still under the flower pot, exactly where I remembered. My hands trembled as I unlocked the back door, the sound of the mechanism turning seeming impossibly loud in the silence. I stepped inside and immediately smelled something that made my stomach turn. The odor was subtle but unmistakable, the sweet, cloying scent of something organic that had been left too long in a closed space. It was stronger upstairs, leading me toward the bedroom where we had spent so many afternoons together. Each step felt like walking deeper into a nightmare I wasn't prepared to face. The bedroom door was closed. I stood outside it for several minutes, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was inside, but the house was completely silent. When I finally opened the door, the smell hit me like a physical blow, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had found the source of my anonymous correspondence. She was lying on the bed, still wearing the clothes I remembered from our last conversation. The scene was peaceful in a way that made it more horrifying, as if she had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. But the smell and the obvious passage of time made it clear that she had been dead for weeks, possibly since shortly after I last saw her. I backed out of the room, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had discovered. She hadn't been sending the anonymous notes. She hadn't returned to the house. Someone else had been using her death to manipulate me, someone who knew about our relationship and was using that knowledge for purposes I still couldn't understand. The realization that I was standing in a crime scene, that my fingerprints were now on surfaces throughout the house, that I had no way to explain my presence here without confessing to the affair, made me panic in a way that clouded my judgment. Instead of calling the police immediately, I fled. I drove home in a state of shock, my mind racing through the implications of what I had seen. Someone had killed her, and that same someone was now tormenting me with anonymous threats. But why? What did they want from me? And how long had they been planning this elaborate psychological torture? The next morning brought a third note, this one more specific than the previous messages. Now you know what happens to people who don't pay attention to warnings. Transfer $50,000 to the account number below, or your spouse learns about your summer activities. You have 48 hours. The note included detailed bank routing information and instructions for making the transfer anonymously. The amount was large enough to be devastating to our finances, but not so large as to be impossible. Whoever was behind this had calculated exactly how much they could demand without pushing me to desperate measures. But the discovery of her body had changed everything. This wasn't just extortion anymore. This was a murder case, and I was now a witness to evidence that could solve it. The right thing to do was to call the police immediately, to report what I had found and accept whatever consequences came from my involvement. But doing so would mean confessing the affair to my spouse, destroying our marriage, and becoming a suspect in a murder investigation. The person demanding money knew this, knew that my fear of exposure would make me willing to pay rather than involve authorities. As I stared at the bank account information, I realized that making the transfer would create a permanent record of my compliance, evidence that could be used to implicate me further or to demand additional payments. But refusing to pay would mean facing consequences I wasn't prepared to handle. The 48-hour deadline meant I had to make a decision quickly. Pay the money and hope it ended there, or find another story 9. The tilted frame. The photographs had always been lined up perfectly, evenly spaced along the hallway wall. Each frame held a snapshot of a moment captured in time, unchanging, immutable. I used to pass by them without thought, their presence as constant as the creak in the floorboards beneath. But last Tuesday I noticed the fourth picture was slightly askew. I straightened it, thinking little of it. Yesterday, two more frames tilted, not dramatically, but just enough to catch my eye. Today, they're all perfectly aligned again, except for a single frame, the last on the right, hanging straight while the others lean ever so slightly. I can't shake the feeling it wasn't supposed to be like that. The frame contained a photograph of my sister's wedding reception. Everyone gathered around the bride and groom, faces frozen in celebration. But as I stared at it, my eyes kept drifting to a figure in the background, a man in a dark suit standing near the edge of the frame, partially obscured by shadows. I'd never noticed him before, though I'd walked past this picture countless times over the years. My fingers traced the glass surface, leaving smudges that caught the hallway light. The man's face was turned slightly away from the camera, but something about his posture seemed familiar. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he appeared to be watching the festivities with an intensity that felt out of place among the casual joy of the other guests. I pulled the frame from the wall, surprised by its weight. The backing was secured with small metal clips, and as I turned it over, I noticed something I'd never seen before: a small piece of paper tucked beneath the frame's edge. My heart began to beat faster as I carefully extracted it. The paper was yellowed and brittle, with handwriting I didn't recognize. 3 words were scrawled across it in blue ink: he was there. The hallway suddenly felt colder. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a sound that had never seemed so loud before. My hands trembled slightly as I held the note up to the light, searching for any other markings or clues about who might have written it. I called my sister that evening. Her voice sounded tired when she answered, and I could hear children playing in the background. "Do you remember everyone who came to your wedding?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She laughed, but it sounded forced. "That was over a decade ago. Why are you asking?" I was looking at the photos again, and I noticed someone I didn't recognize. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, become smaller, more guarded. "Which photo?" "The one from the reception. There's a man in a dark suit standing in the background." Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "I need to go," she said finally. "The kids need dinner." The line went dead before I could respond. That night I spread all the wedding photos across my kitchen table. There were dozens of them, capturing different moments throughout the day. In nearly every reception photo, I could spot the same figure, always in the background, always watching, never smiling, never engaging with other guests, just observing. I found a magnifying glass in my desk drawer and examined each image more closely. In one photo, taken near the cake table, the man's face was partially visible. He appeared to be middle-aged, with dark hair and sharp features. But what struck me most was his expression: intense, almost predatory. The smell of coffee from my morning pot had grown cold and bitter, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on a detail I'd missed before. In several photos, other guests seemed to be deliberately avoiding the area where the man stood. There were empty spaces around him, as if people instinctively kept their distance. I decided to visit my sister the next day. Her house sat at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by overgrown hedges that hadn't been trimmed in months. The paint on her front door was peeling, and newspapers had accumulated on the porch. When she answered the door, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the same clothes I'd seen her in the week before. "You look tired," I said. She shrugged and invited me in. The house smelled stale, like windows that hadn't been opened in too long. Children's toys were scattered across the living room floor, but I didn't see or hear any children. "Where are the kids?" "At their grandmother's," she replied, settling into a worn armchair. "They're staying there for a while." I pulled out one of the wedding photos and placed it on the coffee table between us. Her eyes immediately found the figure in the background, and I watched her face pale. "Who is he?" I asked. She stared at the photo for a long moment, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite identify, fear, maybe, or resignation. "I don't know," she whispered, "but he's been in my dreams." The words hung in the air between us. Outside, a dog was barking incessantly, and the sound seemed to echo through the empty house. "What kind of dreams?" She shook her head as if trying to dislodge unwanted memories. "He's always watching, standing in corners behind trees across the street, just watching." I felt a chill run down my spine. When did the dreams start? A few months ago, right around the time I found the first note. My breath caught. What note? She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small piece of paper, similar to the one I'd found behind the photograph. This one contained a single word: remember. The handwriting was identical. "Where did you find it?" "Under my car windshield wiper. I thought it was just random, maybe someone playing a prank. But then I found another one in my mailbox and another one tucked into my grocery bag." She pulled out a small stack of papers, each containing brief, cryptic messages. "You saw, the night before. He knows you know." My hands shook as I examined each note. The paper was the same yellow type, the blue ink identical. Someone had been systematically leaving these messages for my sister, and now I'd found one too. "Have you called the police?" She laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That someone's leaving me mysterious notes, and I'm having dreams about a man from my wedding photos. They think I'm losing my mind." "Maybe you should consider that possibility," I said gently. Her eyes flashed with anger. "You think I'm making this up?" "I think you're under a lot of stress. The divorce, the kids, starting over." "This isn't about stress," she interrupted. "Something happened at my wedding, something I'd forgotten until the dreams started bringing it back." She stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to peer outside. The gesture seemed automatic, as if she'd done it countless times. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I went for a walk around the hotel grounds just to clear my head. It was late, probably past midnight. I remember thinking how quiet everything was, how peaceful. She paused, still staring out the window. I was near the garden area when I heard voices, two men talking in low tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but something about their conversation felt urgent, secretive. I hid behind some bushes and listened. The dog outside had stopped barking, and the sudden silence felt oppressive. One of the voices belonged to my ex-husband. I recognized it immediately. But the other voice was unfamiliar, deep, gravelly, with an accent I couldn't place. They were arguing about something, and I heard my name mentioned several times. She turned back to face me, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. I tried to get closer to hear better, but I stepped on a branch. It snapped, and both men went silent. I held my breath, terrified they'd find me. After what felt like forever, I heard footsteps walking away. When I finally worked up the courage to look, they were gone. The story felt incomplete, like she was holding something back. I could sense there was more, something she wasn't ready to share. Did you ever ask your ex-husband about it? She shook her head. The next day was the wedding, and I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, or maybe misheard. I was nervous, emotional. It was easier to pretend it never happened. But now you think the man in the photos was the same person your ex-husband was talking to. I'm almost certain of it. The voice in my dreams matches the one I heard that night. I studied the wedding photo again, trying to imagine the figure speaking, but his face remained frustratingly obscured. There was something deliberately evasive about his positioning, as if he'd known exactly how to avoid being clearly captured by the camera. What do you think they were discussing? She returned to her chair, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold. I've been trying to remember more details. Sometimes in the dreams I catch fragments of the conversation, words like payment and insurance and accident, but I can never piece it together into anything coherent. The word accident sent a chill through me. I remembered something from years ago, something I'd almost forgotten. Didn't your ex-husband's business partner die in an accident around that time? Her face went completely white. How did you remember that? It was in the local newspaper, a car accident, I think. He went off the road late at night. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. The accident happened 3 days after our wedding. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture, but I wasn't sure I wanted to see the complete image. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating, and I found myself unconsciously holding my breath. Do you think your ex-husband was involved somehow? I don't know what to think anymore, but I keep wondering why someone would leave me these notes now, all these years later. What changed? What made someone decide I needed to remember? I thought about the photograph frames in my hallway, how they'd been mysteriously rearranged. Someone had been in my house, someone who knew about my connection to the wedding, to my sister, to whatever secret was buried in those photos. I think someone's trying to tell us something, I said, or warn us. She looked up at me with frightened eyes. Warn us about what? Before I could answer, we both heard the sound of a car door slamming outside. My sister immediately tensed, her body going rigid with fear. She crept back to the window and peered through the curtain. There's a man getting out of a dark sedan, she whispered. I've never seen him before. My heart began to race. What does he look like? Middle-aged, dark hair, wearing a suit. She turned to me with terror in her eyes. He looks like the man from the wedding photos. We watched in silence as the figure approached the front door. His movements were deliberate and confident, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. The doorbell rang, a sharp sound that seemed to echo through the empty house. Neither of us moved. The bell rang again, followed by a firm knock. I know you're in there, called a deep voice from outside. The accent was slight but noticeable, just as my sister had described from her memory of that night years ago. My sister grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. We could hear footsteps moving around the perimeter of the house, as if the visitor was checking for other entrances. The back door rattled as someone tested the handle. We should call the police, I whispered. She shook her head frantically. What if he's gone by the time they get here? What if they don't believe us? The footsteps returned to the front of the house. There was another knock, more insistent this time. "I just want to talk," the voice called out, "about the accident, about what really happened." My sister's breathing became rapid and shallow. I could see she was on the verge of panic. The voice continued, "I know you remember more than you've admitted. I know you were there that night listening. I saw you in the bushes." The admission hung in the air like a physical presence. This man had known all along that my sister had overheard the conversation. He'd been aware of her presence for over a decade. "Why now?" my sister called out suddenly, surprising both me and apparently the man outside. "Why are you coming forward now?" There was a pause before he answered. "Because your ex-husband is dead." The words hit like a physical blow. My sister staggered backward and I caught her arm to steady her. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Car accident," the man replied, 3 nights ago. Went off the road in the same spot where his business partner died all those years ago. Quite a coincidence, don't you think?" I felt the room spinning around me. Too many coincidences, too many connections that couldn't be explained by chance. "What do you want from us?" I called out. "I want to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to anyone else. Your sister knows something that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. I'm here to help her remember so she can protect herself." My sister looked at me with desperate eyes. Should we let him in? Every instinct told me not to trust this man, but I also realized we might never get answers any other way. And if my sister's ex-husband was really dead, if this was all connected to events from years ago, we might be in more danger by remaining ignorant than by confronting the truth. "Okay," I called out, "but we're recording this conversation." I pulled out my phone and started the recording app, though I wasn't sure it would actually provide any protection. The front door opened slowly and the man stepped inside. He was exactly as he appeared in the wedding photos, middle-aged, sharp features, intense eyes. But up close, I could see details that hadn't been visible in the pictures. His hands were scarred, and there was a nervous energy about him that suggested he was as uncomfortable with this encounter as we were. He remained standing near the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. "My name doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is what I know about the night before your wedding and what's been happening since." My sister found her voice. "Tell us about the accident, the first one." The man's expression darkened. "It wasn't an accident. Your ex-husband and his business partner had been embezzling money from their clients for months. When the partner got nervous and threatened to confess, your husband decided he was a liability." "You're saying my ex-husband murdered his partner?" "I'm saying your ex-husband paid me to make it look like an accident. And I'm saying you overheard us finalizing the arrangements that night in the hotel garden." The room felt like it was closing in around us. My sister sank into her chair, her face drained of all color. "But why are you telling us this now?" I asked. "If you were involved, aren't you implicating yourself?" The man smiled grimly. "Because I didn't kill your ex-husband. Someone else did, using the same method I used on his partner. Someone who knows about our arrangement and is tying up loose ends." The implications were staggering. If this man was telling the truth, then someone was systematically eliminating everyone connected to the original murder. And my sister, as the only witness to the planning conversation, would be next. "Who else knows about what happened?" I asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. I've been leaving notes, trying to help your sister remember details that might identify other people who were involved or who might have found out. But someone's been watching my movements, following me." He moved to the window and glanced outside nervously. "I think they followed me here." My sister stood up abruptly. "We need to leave now." But as she moved toward the back door, we heard the sound of car doors slamming outside multiple vehicles, arriving simultaneously. The man cursed under his breath, "Too late." Through the front window, I could see at least 3 dark cars parked on the street. Men in suits were emerging from each vehicle, moving with military precision toward the house. "Who are they?" my sister whispered. The man's face had gone pale. People who want to make sure this story never gets told. We were trapped, the house was surrounded, and we were inside with a confessed killer who claimed he was trying to help us. The irony wasn't lost on me that our protector was the same person who had committed the original crime that started this whole chain of events. "Is there another way out?" I asked. My sister shook her head. "The basement has a small window, but it's too narrow for an adult." The man was checking his pockets, and I realized he was looking for a weapon. The thought that we might be about to witness violence in my sister's living room made my stomach turn. "Wait," I said, "what if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of running, we make sure the truth comes out?" Both of them looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Think about it," I continued. "These people want to silence us because they're afraid of what we know. But what if we make that information public? What if hiding becomes more dangerous than revealing everything?" I held up my phone, still recording. "We have a confession. We have details about 2 murders. We have enough to at least raise questions." The man shook his head. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. These aren't just criminals, they're people with resources, connections, the ability to make problems disappear permanently. Then we make it impossible for them to cover this up." I opened my phone's social media app and prepared to upload the recording. My finger hovered over the share button. If I post this right now, it goes to hundreds of people instantly. It gets copied, shared, spread beyond anyone's ability to contain it. The man stared at me for a moment, then slowly nodded. It might work, or it might just get us killed faster. Outside, we could hear footsteps surrounding the house. Someone was testing the back door handle. "I'm doing it," I said and pressed the button. The recording began uploading. In the meantime, I started typing a message to accompany it, explaining what we discovered and asking people to share it widely. The front door exploded inward just as the upload completed. Men in dark suits flooded into the room, but they stopped short when they saw us standing calmly in the center of the living room instead of cowering in fear. "Too late," I said, holding up my phone. "It's already out there." The lead man, older than the others with gray hair and cold eyes, stepped forward. "You have no idea what you've just done. I've made sure the truth survives, even if we don't." He studied me for a moment, then pulled out his own phone. After a brief conversation in low tones, he hung up and turned back to us. "It seems you've created quite a problem for my employers." "Good," my sister said, speaking for the first time since the men had entered. "Maybe now they'll know how it feels to be afraid." The gray-haired man almost smiled. "You think posting a recording on the internet is going to bring down people who have been covering up crimes for decades. You think social media is more powerful than money, influence, and the ability to discredit witnesses." His confidence was unsettling, but I noticed that none of his men had made any aggressive moves. They seemed to be waiting for instructions. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but it's a start. And now that people are paying attention, it's going to be a lot harder to make us disappear quietly." The man who had confessed to the first murder stepped forward. "There's something else you should know," he said to the gray-haired man. "I kept records, documentation of every job, every payment, every person involved. Insurance, you might say." "You're bluffing." "Try me. Your people killed my former employer before I could collect my final payment. I've got nothing left to lose, and every reason to make sure the whole network gets exposed." The standoff continued for several long moments. I could hear my phone buzzing with notifications, people responding to the recording, sharing it, asking questions. Whatever happened next, the story was already spreading beyond this room. Finally, the gray-haired man gestured to his team. "We're leaving, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is," my sister said quietly. "It's been over for years, we just didn't know it yet." The men filed out as quickly as they had entered, leaving the three of us alone in the damaged living room. The front door hung askew on its hinges, and there were muddy footprints across the carpet. I checked my phone. The recording had been shared dozens of times already, and local news outlets were starting to pick up the story. "What happens now?" my sister asked. The confessed killer was gathering his things, preparing to leave. Now we wait to see if the truth is stronger than the people trying to hide it. He paused at the broken doorway. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all of it. I thought I was just doing a job, but I helped create something much worse." After he left, my sister and I sat in the wreckage of her living room, trying to process everything that had happened. "Do you think we're safe?" she asked. "I don't know, but I think we're safer than we were when we didn't know what we were dealing with." Over the following days, the story exploded across social media and traditional news outlets. Investigators reopened the case of the business partner's death, and new evidence emerged linking it to a broader network of corruption and violence. My sister's ex-husband's death was reclassified from accident to homicide, and several arrests were made in connection with both murders. But questions remained unanswered. The man who had confessed to the first killing disappeared before police could locate him for questioning. The gray-haired man and his team were never identified, and despite all the attention and investigation, the full scope of the conspiracy remained hidden. Sometimes I still find myself staring at those wedding photos, searching for details I might have missed. The mysterious figure in the background seems less threatening now, more like a ghost from a story that's finally been told, at least partially. My sister moved away, started over in a place where nobody knows her history. Her children returned from their grandmother's house, and gradually her dreams stopped featuring the watching man. But late at night, when I'm walking past those photographs in my hallway, I sometimes wonder if we really uncovered the truth or just scratched the surface of something much deeper. The frames hang straight now, perfectly aligned, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching, still waiting. The notes stopped coming, but I kept the ones we found. They sit in a drawer in my desk, yellowed paper with blue ink, mysterious messages from someone who wanted us to remember. And we do remember. We remember that truth is fragile, that justice is incomplete, and that some mysteries resist resolution no matter how much light we shine on them. The story ends where it began, with questions, with doubt, with the unsettling knowledge that some secrets are too dangerous to fully reveal and too important to completely forget. Story 10. It happened every morning like clockwork, a sequence of quiet steps outside my door, too regular to notice at first. Going up then down the hall, always stopping at the third door from mine. The pattern was so ingrained that I managed to ignore it until this morning. A pause longer than usual broke the rhythm. I counted under my breath, timing it unconsciously. Stillness filled the space where the next step should have fallen. Then unexpectedly, 2 steps echoed where there should have been 1. I told myself it was nothing, just a brief distraction. Yet something didn't feel right, like a note out of tune. Tomorrow might explain it, or maybe it won't. The coffee cup sits cold in my hands now, ceramic smooth against my palms. Steam stopped rising from it an hour ago, maybe 2. Time moves strangely when you're listening for something that might not come. The building settles around me with its familiar groans and whispers, but those footsteps remain absent. I remember when I first noticed them, or think I do. Memory has a way of reshaping itself, doesn't it? Like water finding new channels in sand. Was it a Tuesday when I started paying attention? The morning felt different, somehow sharper, more present. I was standing by the window, watching rain streak the glass, when the pattern first registered in my consciousness. 7 steps up the hall, a pause, 3 steps to the door, another pause. Then the return journey, always faster, more purposeful. The building manager mentioned something once, during one of those brief hallway encounters that feel scripted. We were both checking our mail, the metal boxes clicking shut in sequence. Quiet building, he said, not looking at me directly. Good tenants, people who keep to themselves. I nodded, though something in his tone suggested more than casual observation. The way his fingers lingered on his key ring, the slight hesitation before he walked away, as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. Or maybe I imagined that too. The woman in the third door, I never saw her clearly. Glimpses only, fragments of presence, a shadow moving behind frosted glass, the soft sound of a lock turning. Once I caught sight of her hand reaching for the morning paper, fingers pale against the dark hallway. No rings, nails cut short and practical. I started keeping track without meaning to, a mental log that grew more detailed each day. The timing never varied by more than a few minutes, 7:15, 7:20 at the latest. The steps always came from the direction of the stairwell, never the elevator. Always the same rhythm, the same measured pace. Until they stopped. Was it 3 days ago? 4. The absence creates its own kind of presence, more noticeable than the sound ever was. I find myself waiting, listening for something that doesn't come. The silence has weight now, substance. It presses against my door like an uninvited visitor. The detective was young, younger than I expected. She sat across from my kitchen table, notebook open but largely ignored. Her questions came in waves, each one circling back to the same essential mystery. When did you last hear the footsteps? I told her about the morning with the broken rhythm, the pause that lasted too long. She wrote something down, though I couldn't see what. And you never actually spoke with her. Her, we both knew who she meant, though no names had been exchanged. The woman in the third door had become a presence defined by absence, a person shaped by the spaces around her. "No," I said, "I don't think so." The detective looked up at that. "You don't think so?" Memory is unreliable, I know this. Sometimes I remember a conversation in the laundry room, something about fabric softener and the building's old pipes. But when I try to focus on it, the details blur. Was it her voice I heard, or someone else entirely? The fluorescent lights down there cast everything in harsh shadows. Faces become indistinct. "I'm not sure," I admitted. She made another note. The building feels different now, heavier somehow, as if the missing footsteps have upset some essential balance. Other tenants move through the halls more quietly, or maybe I'm just paying attention in ways I never did before. Every sound seems amplified, significant. The man from the apartment below mine mentioned the smell. We were both taking out trash, the bags rustling in the narrow service corridor. "Something's off," he said, wrinkling his nose. "Building management should look into it." I didn't smell anything then, but later, walking past the third door, I caught something faint and sweet. Not unpleasant exactly, but out of place. Like flowers left too long in water, or fruit beginning to turn. The detective came back with more questions, different ones this time, though they seemed to circle the same empty space. "Did she have visitors?" I thought about this. The footsteps I knew were always singular, one person moving with consistent purpose, but there might have been others. Late evening sounds that I attributed to other tenants, other lives playing out behind closed doors. "I don't know," I said, "maybe." "Any arguments, raised voices?" The building's walls are thin. You learn to ignore your neighbor's television shows, their phone calls, their private moments. But now, trying to remember, I couldn't separate what I'd heard from what I might have imagined. Sound travels strangely through old buildings, bouncing off pipes and ductwork, emerging in unexpected places. "I'm not sure what I heard," I told her. She closed her notebook this time, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. The newspaper mentioned it briefly, a small item buried on an inner page. Missing person, they said, possible foul play. The details were sparse, almost deliberately vague. No photograph, just a physical description that could have fit dozens of women. I read it 3 times, looking for something that would connect the words on the page to the footsteps in my hall. But the language was clinical, distant. It transformed a living presence into a collection of statistics and possibilities. The morning routine continues, but changed. I still wake at the same time, still listen for sounds that don't come. The absence has become its own kind of pattern, reliable in its incompleteness. Sometimes I think I hear them again, ghost steps memory made audible. My mind supplies what reality no longer provides, 7 steps up the hall. A pause, 3 steps to the door. But when I check, when I press my ear to the door and hold my breath, there's only silence. The building manager avoids me now. When we pass in the lobby, he nods but doesn't stop to chat. His keys jangle nervously as he walks, a sound that seems too loud in the quiet space. I wanted to ask him about the third door, about the woman who lived there, but the questions feel too large, too complicated. What would I say? That I miss the sound of her footsteps, that their absence has created a hole in my daily rhythm. The detective's card sits on my kitchen counter, edges slightly curled from humidity. Sometimes I pick it up, consider calling with some new detail or half-remembered conversation. But what would I tell her? That the silence is louder than the sound ever was. that I'm starting to question what I actually knew versus what I thought I knew. The smell is stronger now, sweet and cloying, impossible to ignore when I pass the third door. Other tenants have noticed it too. I see them hurrying past, faces turned away, breathing through their mouths. Building management will have to do something soon. The situation can't continue indefinitely. But part of me dreads that moment when whatever truth lies behind the third door finally emerges. Some mysteries are more comfortable when they remain unsolved. I keep thinking about that last morning, the broken rhythm that first caught my attention. 2 steps where there should have been 1. What did that mean? Was someone else there, someone whose presence altered the familiar pattern? Or was it something else entirely? A stumble, perhaps, a moment of hesitation or uncertainty, the kind of small human imperfection that we all experience but rarely notice in others. The detective's questions echo in my mind, mixing with my own doubts and half-formed theories. Did I really know this woman, or did I simply construct her from fragments of sound and shadow? How much of what I remember is actual observation versus imagination filling in the gaps? Late at night, when the building settles into its deepest quiet, I sometimes hear footsteps, not in the hall, somewhere else, more distant. They could be coming from any apartment, any floor. The sound travels through the walls and floors, becoming anonymous, universal. But for a moment, just a moment, the rhythm seems familiar. 7 steps, then a pause, and I find myself counting, timing the intervals, waiting for a pattern that may never complete itself. The third door remains closed. No yellow tape, no official notices. Just silence where sound used to be, absence where presence once existed. The building continues its daily routines around this empty space, life flowing around the obstacle like water around a stone. I realize now that I never knew her name, never saw her face clearly, never heard her voice with certainty. She existed for me as pure pattern, routine made manifest, and now that the pattern is broken, what remains? Questions without answers, sounds without sources, memory without certainty. The footsteps may return tomorrow, or they may not. The mystery may resolve itself, or it may deepen. But something fundamental has shifted in the building's rhythm, in my understanding of the spaces we share with strangers. I set my coffee cup in the sink, finally giving up on the cold liquid inside. Outside my window, morning light filters through the same glass where I first noticed the pattern that started all of this. The day ahead stretches out, filled with familiar routines and expected sounds. But I'll be listening now, always listening, for footsteps that may never come, for patterns that may never repeat, for answers to questions I'm not sure I know how to ask. The silence continues, heavy with possibility and loss. And somewhere in that silence, the truth waits patient, elusive, and perhaps unknowable.